So I was streaming late last night into the wee hours of the morning when suddenly Maximilian the Dude showed up in my chat saying I needed to check out this FF7 video. Now it's been already a good few many months since I beat the game, and while I still think about it, I've been trying to sort of wean myself off some of the theory stuff, you know, just let part 3 come to me. But then this mother fudger has the audacity to show up in my chat room and drop this bombshell of a video just as I'm recovering. Look at this man. It's like a recovering alcoholic, and he's over here just dropping a flask of Captain Morgan in my head and telling me to go to town. As you guys know, the ending to FF7 Rebirth was a topic of a lot of discussion for quite a while. In fact, I talked with Max about it on a live stream, which also got made into a video quite a few months ago. If you're interested in that video, I can point you right up there, where we tried our best to break down Rebirth's many secrets and what those implications could lead to in part 3. But apparently a creator by the name of Subtext just released a 2-hour video titled Why Rebirth Didn't End How Anyone Expected. But apparently this breaks down a lot of the common theories that have formed around this game and potentially poses some new ones. And I've heard that this video is excellent. And the fact that it got Max so hyped about it does lead me to believe that there is a shred of truth in that. So I kind of want to see it. I want to see what the hell has got everyone on a kerfuffle about this. Because try as I might, I still think about Rebirth's ending and that game as a whole very often. So much so that I have been replaying the entire game on PC again, even though I literally broke my back platinuming that game on PS5. And dude, platinuming that game it's just horrendous pain. Why did I do that? Why am I playing it again? God damn this wonderful game. But before we get into watching this insanely epic, essentially a motion picture here, I would like to ask you guys that while I have gotten the affirmative from Max that Subtext is okay with people reacting to his video, I'm leaving a link to it down below. It should be right at the top of the description. Please do me a big favor. Click on that. Go like that video. Go and consider subscribing to his channel, because needless to say, this video likely took many hours of research, of editing, of theorizing to make this. So please go send some love. Even consider leaving a comment on the video. Tell him Nico sent you. And then you're gonna hop on back here and we'll experience this together. I really don't know what, I don't know. I don't actually know how much of this is going to be information that is completely new, if it's just simply a retelling of things that have already been theorized at this point, or if Subtext himself has found like a lot of new evidence for things that we never even considered. Oh Lord, are we about to go down that rabbit hole again, aren't we, boys and girls? Also, needless to say, spoilers for FF7 Remake and Rebirth, you know, duh. So go play those games first, or watch somebody play those games first before watching this video. Right, with that, let's see what the hell this is all about.
No,
all right, here we go.
I couldn't have dreamt that. It all felt way too real.
Spoilers, yeah, as I said. No duh. It's freaking ending, man. He did it! He saved her! Wait, no. Maybe not. Damn, the editing on this, though. This game is so fucking good, dude. This game is pure magic. Jesus Christ, man. Give me the goosebumps. Yes, I'm so ready. I love the Lifestream theme. Guys, maybe we'll go on back and play more of this game.
What do you make of this, Cloud?
Fuck if I know.
Is any of it real? Or is it all just a fever dream?
At this point, nearly a year from FF7 Rebirth's release, there is a good chance you've listened to a whole lot of other analysis videos and discussions about FF7 Rebirth and its ending. And odds are,
Hell yeah.
you may believe somewhere deep down that you've heard all there is to hear about it. If that's the case, good. As someone just like you, I've heard it all too.
Hey, that's mine.
I'm making this video to talk about all the things I haven't heard people talking about. I have fine-tuned, rewritten, and re-recorded this video more times than The Last of Us has been re-released, and I've taken nearly a year doing it to make sure you walk away from this with a whole new understanding of why FF7 Rebirth ended the way it did, and what it means for the entire trilogy story. I want to make sure that even if you sucked up all of the FF7 Rebirth videos that exist up to this point, this video would still make you say, holy crap, I've never thought of that. This isn't to say there aren't good videos out there. There are plenty, and I agree with a lot of what they've concluded, that all of this was done to deepen the depiction of Cloud as an unreliable narrator, and to keep us talking as we wait for the next game, to keep everyone speculating about what may happen in Part 3. Yes, totally, 100%.
Nailed it, I know, thank you. Moving on.
All of that is correct, but that's not even necessarily a secret. In fact, the developers have already come out and just said that's what they did. That is why this video exists, because that is just barely scratching the surface on why this game ended the way it did. As a writer myself, I have found so many hidden reasons for so many storytelling choices in Rebirth that I haven't seen discussed. Reasons that may be hidden from us even as we stare directly at them. Reasons that may reveal how this game may be changing fate even when it doesn't look like it does. Reasons that, surprisingly even to me, have almost nothing to do with counting rainbows or different dog breeds, no matter how tempting it is to overanalyze those things. The truth is that there is a far bigger picture I haven't seen people talking about, and if there's anything I'm good at, it's catching things most people aren't talking about.
I'm gonna find it. Here it is. So this was from Subtext on Twitter. This is a spoiler. This is a heads up. This is the credits of the game. If you speed up every single cutscene, Subtext did his work.
Yeah.
These specific scenes are the weird fucking scenes. Again, the weird scenes are the ones that are missing.
That is the aim of this video, to give you a whole new perspective on not only the story and its finer details, but also many of the big questions that surround this trilogy. Though the 2 hours might seem like a lot, I'm going to cover a lot of ground very quickly. Most topics last around 10 minutes each, with the first half of this video focusing on everything directly related to Rebirth, my feelings about the ending, whether this is all a sequel to the original or not, and some deep storytelling theory that helps answer why the developers focus so heavily on the idea of changing fate in Remake, given that not much of fate seems to be changed by the end of Rebirth. The second half then focuses on the future, looking at the big themes of the entire Remake trilogy and how they may blend a lot of the new and old elements into one cohesive story in Part 3. And while this video is mostly about the big picture, the true starting point for all of that analysis was born out of spending months wrestling with my conflicting feelings about the ending. It didn't feel like the ending was good. You know, that feeling when you reach an ending to something and you just say, God damn. But it was also hard to say that it was bad. I got a lot of what they were going for, but I was just a bit bewildered. There were so many questions on my mind. What did I just experience? What exactly happens? Why did they do it that way? And as the months have passed, I've had more time to digest it all. And in that process, I've gotten to do something that I love the Remake trilogy for. Something that is, in truth, the reason I started this whole YouTube thing. On this channel, my intention is to deconstruct the reasons why stories and games are told the way they are, a deep dive into the possible thoughts and intentions of the creative people behind it, and what may be going on underneath the surface.
And that's the thing about this, about FF7 in general, and this remake series in general, is that the developers are they have their head to the ground so much, right? And every scene and every spot of dialogue in this game and remake are so meticulously crafted. Like, they're done in such a way, like, it isn't just done for the hell of it, right? Like, so many scenes are shot and shown in such a way that they want you to almost unconsciously feel and notice something, right? They might actually like I said, it seems to me like he's clearly found something, right, that none of us have seemingly put together in the numerous like essay videos about this game. And it's probably interesting for them as the writers for this, I'm sure, watching and seeing all of this, because clearly they're reacting. They have seen a lot of these discussions about this. It's probably very interesting for them to see whether these ideas that they've implemented have been discovered by people. So I think that this is one of those series that is just so rife with discussion, because it's such a, like, nothing is like this. There's no other game series out there that is like what these guys are actually tackling with what it was just supposed to be a remake of a beloved series, right? And I almost feel like this will never likely happen ever again either. Like there's never going to be another FF7 remake like, because this has clearly been an insanely ambitious project that has also not necessarily led to Square making a shit ton of money, but it's clearly full of so much love and admiration for the original series while trying to push it in a direction that actually makes you think beyond the scope of what they put on the original PS1, you know? So yeah, I don't know. Let's hear.
An unpacking of the creative subtext, if you will, behind the creativity that we love and hate to debate. And that is because I, as a person, am obsessed with creativity. For the longest time, I wanted to be a screenwriter. And in the years since, I've built a different career in the creative arts. And in my time studying and then working professionally on creative projects, I've come to appreciate all of the thinking that goes into them, even when they don't fully work. That's because there is a real truth to the incredible monologue that comes from a critic toward the end of Ratatouille.
In many ways, the work of a critic is easy. We risk very little, yet enjoy a position over those who offer up their work and themselves to our judgment. We thrive on negative criticism, which is fun to write and to read.
Took a dump of my childhood.
The bitter truth we critics must face is that in the grand scheme of things, the average piece of junk is probably more meaningful than our criticism designating it so. But there are times when a critic truly risks something, and that is in the discovery and defense of the new. The world is often unkind to new talent, new creations. The new needs friends.
That's why this video isn't about telling you definitively whether FF7 Rebirth's ending was genius or garbage. That's for you to decide.
And to be honest, I mean, and before saying what he's going to say here, I mean, we're not really going to know the answer to that until we get to part 3, right? If part 3 sticks to the landing and manages to show that the decisions they made at the ending of this game was worthwhile, then hell yeah, man. Fuck yeah. Then this shit will go down in history as like one of the most insane fucking trilogy of games ever. But it's also very possible that we might get to the end and go, I don't know, man. It just wasn't quite right. That's why is why part 3 really is going to be just that game. This is really going to decide how we end up feeling about this series, you know? It's why both Remake and Rebirth have that feeling at the end where you're just like, I don't know, like I loved it, but also I don't know if this is necessarily going to be the right decision or going to lead to people enjoying what they've set up for us, you know?
And it's not really something I'm interested in doing. Instead, I'm interested in diving into the different dimensions of it and digging deep into things I haven't seen discussed about this ending. Reasons why I feel like the ending can be seen as both a success and a failure, with both conclusions drawn by looking at the story through the lens of classic storytelling principles. That sense of duality, that two things can be true at once, is rampant in both Rebirth and this video. I've seen both positive and negative reactions to this ending, and I myself have experienced both feelings. I also think, and don't hate me for saying this, that's perfectly normal. I hate that we live in this world where hot takes and hard stances are the expectation, and God forbid you have any nuanced opinions about anything. Well, I'm sorry, but I do. I love this game. It is, in so many ways, so much more than I could have ever imagined it to be.
Yeah,
I flew through the
too,
canyons, dove into the Lifestream, fought Vincent Valentine as the goddamn Galleon Beast. I even cried, which, honestly, the original never actually accomplished for me, personally. It is gaming at its most peak, but it ain't perfect. It does some things brilliantly, and it does some things kind of stupidly, sometimes within minutes of each other. And that is okay. It's not perfect.
He just grew him, man,
Robin
okay?
Williams once said to a young Matt Damon,
"You're not perfect, sport. And let me save you the suspense. This girl you met, she isn't perfect either. But the question is whether or not you're perfect for each other. That's the whole deal."
An amazing movie that is. And the amazing scene this shit is. Triple Text Part 3, let's go. Totally gonna happen, by the way. Why though? Okay, but why though? Tell me!
when I reached the credits of FF7 Rebirth, something happened inside me that didn't happen at the end of FF7 Remake. I was genuinely a bit disappointed. As much as I loved nearly the entire journey and was blown away by so much of the Rebirth experience as both a story and a video game, something about the ending left me feeling numb to it. I wasn't mad, I wasn't sad, I wasn't happy, I wasn't upset, I wasn't excited, I wasn't even very confused, at least in the moment. I just felt nothing. It felt like the game had just literally thrown everything at me. It gave me saving Aerith and losing her. It gave me Cloud and Zack reuniting and separating. It gave me a heartbreaking goodbye scene and a comforting farewell. And it did all of that in a breakneck, non-stop torrent of scenes where I was hopping into different worlds, flying through singularity gaps, seeing different versions of events at the same time, trying to decode everything being said by the most cryptic villain in gaming history, and getting into a multi-dimensional 14-phase boss fight with literally 12 different party combinations.
I think part of the reason for that is information overload. Like, genuinely, there's so much happening in the last like hour of the game, just so much, just back to back to back to back to back, that the game doesn't really give you much time to process it. And I do feel to some extent that you could even argue that was sort of there in the original, right? Because you immediately like go into a boss fight right after Aerith. But this one is like, because this is ending the game, the end of it, they have to have like, it just, not just obviously fighting Genova Life, but fucking everybody, you know? Here comes Sephiroth in his crazy new form, and here comes this fucking, you know, new fight with him specifically, and then Aerith shows up, and then this happened, and then this, and then by the end, it's like, you're just like Sora asking if any of this is for real or not, you know? And you're left less with a feeling and more just confusion. I mean, that's all, like, I was happy because I think that this game is beautiful in a lot of ways, but I felt that the execution, that by the end you just sort of, I don't know, it didn't surprise me that much, to be honest. I wasn't surprised that this middle game ended up being so weirdly kind of unsatisfying, but it didn't leave the cliffhanger that I sort of expected. Like, the cliffhanger that's here is not like, oh, did she die or not, right? It's so vague that people will just likely believe that she did die, or others will just look at it as she didn't die. So it's the same fate regardless, you know? So it's just more like, toss a coin, man. I don't know.
Not to mention the fact that some of those party members may or may not have actually been alive. All of that was before a final series of scenes with shapeshifters and walking, talking dead people. It was a lot to take in. And if I'm being completely honest, I felt like the devs were cowards for it. Not to say I wanted Aerith to be saved, as I'll talk about later, but because it came across like they were too afraid to make a real choice. Sure, the final choice seems to be her death, but they couldn't just do that. No. They instead had to at least give fans the imagery they so desired. Aerith being saved, just moments after establishing that such fate-breaking events could conceivably create alternative worlds that may not even matter, given the apparent pointlessness of Zack's different worlds, a plot device that seemed at the time not like a multiverse of madness, but rather a multiverse of meandering nothingness. In short, it felt like the creators didn't really make any choices, and instead kept every possibility on the table, keeping Aerith around just in case fans rioted around her death, and keeping Zack in the background until they could maybe finally do something impactful with him in part 3.
Interesting. I definitely didn't quite feel that jaded. Shit. I mean, Aerith's death, or Aerith not death or whatever, to me, it was never, not so much that, like, I don't know, fan backlash or something would cause them to change the story. No, these motherfuckers know exactly what the story is going to be, right? I think the big issue, specifically with Zack, is that they just didn't give him substantial enough reason to be in this story, aside from showing up at the end and essentially establishing whatever the hell this weird timeline shit is going on, right? But I think that he felt very underutilized, you know? Like they stuck too much to the actual base story of the game without really giving him a chance to shine, right? I guess in that way, you could say maybe they were too much of cowards to like change that story that much, right? But I don't know. I still feel that it's all leading to something. You know?
In that way, it didn't even feel like a cliffhanger. It felt like a cop-out, a way to throw every possibility and every emotion at us in an attempt to get us talking without providing any resolution. And in so doing, it failed at delivering what most of us expect from an ending to practically anything. In a bit of irony, given his inability to finish the Song of Ice and Fire books to the point that it led to a pretty awful ending to the Game of Thrones show, George R.R. Martin once said this about endings, quote, "A good story should make you feel something, whether it's joy, sorrow, or even anger. If you reach the end of a story and feel nothing, then it hasn't done its job." And that is a big reason why the ending didn't connect for me after my first playthrough. I didn't know what to feel because the game went out of its way to make sure I couldn't be sure of anything.
Right.
My emotions were
that.
standing at the control panel, stumped as to what to do. And it's hard to know how you feel about an ending when you don't know what to feel. That sense of narrative indecisiveness, the feeling that the writers didn't really make any choices and just kept every possibility on the table, may have been amplified in my head because of interviews that dropped right before Rebirth came out, where producer Yoshinori Kitase talked about potentially changing direction on part 3 depending on fan response.
Ooh, I did not see that. As a first draft, but it could change based on Rebirth feedback. Ooh. Okay, well, that makes sense. Yeah, if I had read that beforehand, that may have led me down a path like that feeling too. I see. That makes sense. That I did not know about.
About potentially changing direction on part 3 depending on fan response. Quote, "Well, we've of course already gotten started with part 3 at the scenario and plot level. We have a tentative first draft for the scenario and it's in a finished state, so things have gotten started. That said, although we've gotten some work done, there will still be parts we create by combining players' responses and reactions and going over that feedback. So after the release of part 2, it's possible that the things we're coming up with for part 3, the concept, etc. will change. Therefore, I hope everyone will play part 2 before part 3 and keep providing us with your reactions to it."
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. Like, I don't know. I do feel that is not necessarily the best thing to do when coming to writing something, at least in my opinion, especially in works of fiction that are being split between multiple games, whether it's multiple episodes of something or whether it's multiple books of something. I feel that like the creator itself should generally try to stick to their guns to what they're trying to say, because if they listen too much to what people are saying about their work before they've even seen the ending to it, you know, that could essentially lead to them changing it, creating more plot holes and a much less satisfying ending because they were worried too much about, you know, fan backlash. So yeah, that's that would be I'd be a little worried after that too. Yeah.
At the time, I remember this being a giant red flag for some fans. But for me, at least when that quote first dropped, I wasn't bothered by it all that much because, to some extent, of course, you would probably alter some things based on fan response. What if people missed an important detail? Well, then you might need to clarify that in the next game. What if people figured something out early? Then maybe you would need to throw that into doubt a little bit. What if you rushed past a critical plot point so quickly that people didn't even realize it was talked about?
I'll stop the meteor.
This is so weird. This is so weird. Why say that? Like, have we even talked about there being a meteor yet? Have we even talked about what the black materia does?
Yeah, exactly. Like, she says that line at the end and literally has not been brought up in the story, like, at all. So, like,
I don't think we have.
Long story short, there were a million reasons why fan feedback could have impacted the draft of Part 3 scenario. But while sitting on my couch at 2 a.m. after beating the game, it felt like they had opened so many potential plot doors to walk through that it seemed like I was facing the worst possibility. That maybe they really didn't have all of this planned as much as I had hoped. If true, that would also mean that their ambition was something far lesser than what they had implicitly promised with the ending of Remake. It felt like they had mostly made these changes just so they can lay on some thick fan service without actually making any bold choices or risking anything real and consequential about the story. Fans are divided about killing or saving Aerith? How about both? You want to fight with Zack and Cloud? You got it. You want to say a proper goodbye to Aerith? How about we do that 3 different times? In the direct aftermath of the ending, it felt like the only thing they were certain about was giving us dream scenarios that would make fans happy, regardless of how little sense it made. They even sent a defeated message to a friend of mine the day after beating Rebirth that said simply, the only concept for any kind of video I can think of right now is, maybe it's just fan service. But as someone who spent a lot of time digging into the narrative construction of Remake, the idea that they didn't have all this planned out felt almost impossible. Of course, details would change, but it felt like the idea that they didn't have an overall ending in mind just didn't make sense to me. It wasn't like the Star Wars sequels, where a different director and writer headed every project. It was mostly one unified creative team that had been working together for decades. So, after several months of thinking about it, and a full replay of the game later, it does seem impossible. That feeling has almost completely subsided. In fact, this ending that I just spent several minutes criticizing may be an ending that I actually love. And that's because I may finally understand what it's really about. To help explain what I mean, I will need to dig into a few meaty questions about why they built the story of Rebirth the way they did. Of course, the most obvious reasons as to why they ended the story this way are clear. To keep us all talking for the next 3 years, and to mess with Cloud's head, to further disrupt his sense of what's real. All of this has been much discussed, and I agree. But that answer isn't quite satisfying enough. If that's all their goal is, to depict a mental collapse that already happens in the original game without all of this multi-world nonsense, then why do it this way? Why was that worth such a big change to FF7's most iconic moment, Final Fantasy VII's most emotional scene, a change that seems to prioritize confusion over emotion when emotion should arguably matter most? And why was it worth introducing the whole idea of changing fate if the fate fans care about most wasn't changed? That question is where we'll start, because it's at the heart of a question I've heard asked constantly since FF7 Rebirth came out.
Right. That's a good question. That's actually a really good point. What's the point then? Essentially, setting up this idea that fate can change when in the end it just ends up being the exact same. Is that the purpose, maybe? That fate cannot be changed, right? But is that really a satisfying answer?
Okay, you have to justify now why you're making these changes. And I almost don't feel like that was answered with how Remake ended in some instances, because I was like, okay, your answer to changing things is to change nothing.
Like, I thought the Rebirth was going to be like, hey man, it's a new adventure. We
Even
might
like
go to
10 hour, both of us 10 hours in, coming to each other with like theories of how off the rails they were going to go, and then
they just did it, which I think is a surprise.
This, if we fail That's what's going to happen. If we don't change fate, that is what will happen. So that is the original fate that they were going to change. And if that's true, then why did Aerith die? Like, they aren't changing the game.
My theory is that they backed off a lot of the changes they were going to make in Rebirth when they got reaction to what happened at the end of Remake. I think Zack was probably a lot more involved in that original script idea, and then he is in the final game. I suspect they're also looking at like reactions to Rebirth as they're making whatever they call the next game.
I sort of felt like that almost happened as I was playing through Rebirth, where it's like, oh, it seemed like this was all setting up for this, but then it didn't, and it did something completely different, almost to like go against the expectations that people had, you know? And you have to realize that all these big plot devices and how they eventually work out, regardless of what everybody's theory is, are 100% subject to change over the next 3 to 4 years.
Yep.
It's not surprising that a lot of people walked away from FF7 Rebirth feeling like the developers backtracked on the idea of changing fate, which seemed to be the main point of Remake's ending. Hell, it even seemed like they had backtracked on wanting to include Zack in the game, despite being on the cover. I mean, why promote him so heavily and then only give him roughly 40 minutes of gameplay and cutscenes in a 40+ hour story? In fact, before getting into the bigger fate question, let's start with Zack. If there was a decision to scale back his role in Rebirth, as I've seen a lot of fans speculate, then why put him on the cover? It's not like they revealed the cover very early in development and were locked into it. They revealed it just 5 months before release, and Nomura gave an entire logic to it that made Zack as equally as important as the other 2 cover stars. But even more noteworthy, in an interview with Game Informer in December, roughly 2.5 months from release, director Naoki Hamaguchi said this.
Yeah, I remember this video.
We have used the character Zack to depict the combined view of writer Kazushige Nojima, creator-director Tetsuya Nomura, and producer Yoshinori Kitase, the original creators, intents of how this world of Final Fantasy VII came to be, and its policies and rules governing this world. This is going to be depicted through the character of Zack. As much as the whispers within the story, Zack is an equally immensely important, crucial key character to this story that I believe fans will enjoy in Rebirth.
So the idea, is that because so much of this game, unfortunately, is not focused on the actual grand picture of what they're setting up for Remake and its trilogy as a whole, right? Much of this game really is just a retelling of the exact same story that we've sort of come to know. And interspliced in between all those moments are Zack in his search and for answers, right? In a world that is seemingly just a dying timeline, right? And that part, is essentially that is the plot. That's the actual true plot of this game. Because really, when you really look at it, what actually happens in this game is there's not a ton that happens, right? It's mostly just like, gallivanting across the world and country with your pals, trying to help out the hooded guys and find Sephiroth, right? Which is pretty much what it is at that part in the regular game. So Zack is basically the change. In that way. And the problem and why it's frustrates so many people is that he's on the front of the box and yet the game focuses so little on it. But it's clear that he's meant to be important. And the problem I think is that that importance is just not going to truly land until part 3. But it's clearly also the backbone to this entire story as to what's happening, right? A lot of what the Remake trilogy is the Square guys trying to have sort of both sides where they are able to craft a new story around a pre-existing one, that one we've already come to know, right? They want to be able to change it, want to be able to make it different to us while still keeping it the same. So I definitely see why people think that this is like they backtracked, but like I said, these guys are so meticulous about this shit that I don't think it's necessarily them choosing to cut Zack and give him less to do in the game. I feel like a lot of this was probably planned out. I still feel that they should have done more with it, but it is essentially the very small bit of what this game shows about how the world lines and timelines and this crazy like situation, how it actually functions in this world, right? That they end up dying, that they lead to possible realities that never happened, that this is actually or isn't actually the real person that happened, right? Like, did he die? Did he not die? Is that what we saw with Cloud? That's everything ties back into the actual ending itself, right?
With this quote, just a couple of months from release, we find more evidence of the confusing dualities within Rebirth. The developers say he is an immensely important, crucial key character, yet he gets surprisingly little screen time and is practically ignored by Sephiroth more than once.
Yeah.
You want a piece of me?
Sephiroth's like,
not you.
He's like, I don't give a shit about you. Bye.
What the hell happened to you? You were a soldier. How could you turn your back on everything we stand for?
Easily.
He actively disrespects Zack's presence in one moment and casually slaps away a piercing question in the next. Sephiroth treats him like a mild irritant more than an important character. And it's not just Sephiroth that seems to treat him this way. The game itself does by giving you the option to just turn off his scenes in New Game Plus. His presence doesn't seem all that important, yet it apparently is. Hell, a Zack moment is what opens the game and serves as Rebirth's title drop. So then, why feature Zack so prominently and say his presence matters so much? I mean, sure, maybe because of marketing, given Zack's popularity, but I think that's too cynical and kind of backfired from talking to a few Zack fans who were disappointed with how little there was of him in the game. And if it were only for that, I don't think the game's director would call him an immensely important, crucial key character. Of course he'd hype him up, but that description goes a little far considering how much of the game he's in. I think the reason is because the developers are truly thinking about the entire 3-game experience of this story.
Yep.
There were multiple moments included in Remake that don't really make much sense until Rebirth. And it's because the developers are far more concerned with the full trilogy experience than the experience of each individual game.
You know, it's funny, he just should have seen that I was talking to Max about this, that I was thinking of the scene. It's literally the first scene from Remake where Sephiroth appears, right? Like just suddenly after the bombing of the Sector 6 reactor, right? Or Sector 7 or whatever. And he just like shows up, right? Because the game up to that point is generally following almost exactly one-to-one what it was. And then Sephiroth just shows up. And to me, that is like the mark of what this trilogy is, of like that things are different, right? And he tells Cloud, you know, you have to run, you have to live, which is the thing that his mom said to him. But it's also interesting because Cloud says to him in that moment, wait, you can't be here. I killed you, right? And then later when he recalls to Barrett and Aerith and Tifa in the Calm Inn about what happened years ago, he doesn't remember what happened after he fights with Sephiroth. So I don't know. When I saw that and I went, that's interesting. Is it potentially like a situation of like an Omni Cloud showing up in that moment, of like him recognizing that Sephiroth shouldn't be here in this moment and he's the one talking? I don't know. That scene in particular just kind of had me, I went back and thought about it a bit more with the context of Rebirth, and I started thinking like, is there more to that than we really gave it credit for? And I feel like a lot of Rebirth kind of has sort of changed my perspective on things in a way that I'm now looking at Remake in a different way, right? And I think that's interesting. It's interesting because I feel it shows potentially that the writers really are thinking about this than I think a lot of people are giving them credit for.
For better or worse. And there is no greater example of that than how they're handling the concept of changing fate. The idea was clearly on the minds of every player as they walked up the steps to the water altar, the setting of the most famous death in not only all of Final Fantasy, but perhaps all of gaming. And it's clear the developers wanted us thinking about it. A lot. First, there was the marketing cycle. In the lead up to Rebirth's release, the developers clarified as early as September that the game would conclude at the Forgotten Capital, where, quote, the greatest fate of Final Fantasy VII awaits you. They did a global media tour saying, quote, "The whole of the story of Rebirth is building up to that dramatic climax," and believed Aerith's fate would, quote, "shock even the players who have played through the original scene multiple times."
How do you think people are going to react to that scene? You know the one.
They even got major mainstream publications like GQ and the New York Times to write features all about the impact of the original death and if it'll be recreated in Rebirth. But let's give that a pass. Let's just say that's marketing doing its job. If you look at the first two games themselves, they also funnel the player into focusing on what may happen at this pivotal point. Let's recap. Remake builds an entire game around the idea of changing fate and hits us over the head with the concept that Aerith knows everything that is to come. Right. She knows the potential consequences of Sephiroth's offer at the end of the highway. She knows the consequences so well that she even hesitates. But in the end, she chooses to accept Sephiroth's offer to follow him into the singularity and change fate. Sephiroth wants to change what's to come, and so does Aerith. And so, at the end of Remake, for everyone other than the most stalwart originalists who believed and still believe nothing major will change, it appeared that the die was cast. Both the party and Sephiroth worked to change fate, to change the future as they knew it and we knew it. And the cliffhanger text doubled down. The unknown journey will continue. The implication was clear. Nothing from this point onward was guaranteed.
Right. But what do they also end on in that moment? What you end on in that moment is seeing that Zack is alive with Cloud, right? Again, that's the wave I think that is riding from this choice that was made.
So, how does Rebirth start? Not in the security of the world we know. No, it starts in Zack's reality with an opening sequence where everything we know is thrown into question and leaves us with a visual that teases Aerith's death, especially for longtime fans who've had the image of the fallen white materia seared into their brains for the past 27 years. Right from the start, from before the first moment we ever control Cloud, the idea is planted in our minds. Aerith's fate is on the line. Throughout the game, there are moments of foreshadowing, some that they even sneak in quite nimbly.
And what about our fourth match? Aerith is in trouble. Will she survive?
While others are far more in your face.
Seek and you are sure to find, but alas, you shall forever lose what you cherish most.
The stars
That's from the original game,
ways.
pretty much.
But there are also moments that are aligned to what's set up in Remake. Moments that are made to feel like they can be interpreted as a sign that perhaps
gonna meet another me.
Change. From Kate Sith talking about a last-minute twist that may pleasantly surprise you, to Marlene outright telling Zack that he needs to help Cloud save Aerith. The most important words, however, come from Aerith herself during her speech in the penultimate chapter of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Right after the emotionally tortuous Temple of the Ancients trials, Aerith says the past is set in stone, but the future, even if it's been written, can be changed. This has been an idea Aerith has repeated over and over since back in Remake, when she did indeed have confirmed knowledge of the future.
It might sound crazy, but back in Midgar, Aerith and I could both see the future.
And you're asking me this? Just had a feeling you'd know.
Yeah.
Probably did at one point. All that stuff was taken from me, though. Or maybe erased?
That means she had seen the future and believed it could and should be changed. If this came from any other character, perhaps it would be easier to dismiss. But coming from Aerith, it feels significant. And if she hadn't said it in Rebirth and only said it in Remake, then I could argue, yeah, maybe they did change their mind. But instead, they made her double down right toward the end of this game. But putting myself in your shoes, I can tell you may not be fully convinced yet. Maybe I'm just a dude who is way overanalyzing a few lines of dialogue. Maybe there is something the developers know that I don't. A fact about how FF7 Remake's ending was received that made them change their mind about this whole changing fate thing. For example, hard data that showed that most players outright hated the direction of Remake. Well, as far as I can tell, that didn't happen. In fact, the data I found seems to say quite the opposite. In one poll of Japanese players conducted by Famitsu in August 2020, 75% of players said they were, quote, very satisfied with Final Fantasy VII Remake. Another 17% said they were quite satisfied, adding up to a whopping 92% of players saying they were satisfied overall. In fact, only 4.3% indicated that they were at all unsatisfied by Remake. One of the player quotes, noted by Famitsu, demonstrated that Remake accomplished exactly what the devs were going for. Quote, before I played it, I did not want them to change anything. But when I actually played it, I found myself engrossed in the story. I had not been into something this much since playing FF7 as an elementary schooler.
Exactly. That feeling right there is exactly how I felt before I played Remake, before I played it. I was definitely on the side of like, bro, why are we making this an action battle system? Why are we changing so much? All you guys need to do is just remake the same freaking game and stick with the turn-based stuff. Just make it look way nicer, you know, give it the visuals of like having children. And we're good, man, we're good. But the interesting thing is, right, and this is why listening to player feedback can be so detrimental, right? Is that a lot of times it's hard for fans to see the big picture of what creatives are actually planning, right? Sometimes you don't know that you want something until it's actually made and put in front of you. You think you want it this way. But what the devs sort of realized early that I feel like a lot of us who were in this mindset did not. They realized that if they were going to split this game into 3, because making a game of this size with the scope that they have at the fidelity that they wanted to was clearly just not going to be possible. If they did that, if they just made the game as it was before, what would push players to come back to it for a part 2 or a part 3 when you know that the story is exactly as you remembered it? Granted, it's shinier and potentially has some new systems and things like that, but like if it's the same story, there's not much reason to necessarily, or much excitement to stir someone into wanting to purchase a part 2 and 3 at full price, right? I mean, maybe you can get them in part 1, but I don't know if you'd be able to keep that momentum going into later games if there wasn't something that tickled their fancy in a way, right? That made them think a bit more about what was actually happening versus it just being the same thing that they had when, you know, they grew up in the 90s like myself. So this ended up being something essentially that I didn't realize I needed or wanted. And I'm actually genuinely happy that they didn't do it the way that I thought that they should.
In another poll conducted by Final Fantasy Union, there were similar results, with players scoring the overall game at an average of 4.45 out of 5, or 89%, almost 90%. And though scores for the ending were slightly lower, it still averaged out to effectively a 4 out of 5, almost 80%. Yeah. These polls aren't necessarily something to sniff at either. The Famitsu poll was conducted with nearly 3,000 participants from perhaps Japan's most well-respected gaming publication. And the Final Fantasy Union poll reached over 14,000 respondents. To put that in perspective, the average sample size of the top polls tracking this year's presidential election is just over 2,300 people per poll. In short, it seems most people were very satisfied with the game and the way it ended. If anything, these results are a flashing green light, and it's fair to say that given one of the polls was done by a legitimate publication that does these kinds of surveys all the time, and the other had a sample size bigger than many small towns in America, it is highly unlikely that any research done by Square Enix themselves would have produced vastly different results. To top it all off, as I was in the middle of editing this video, the developers gave the clearest indication yet that they are still crafting the overall story they want regardless of reaction. In an interview with Young Jump, creative director Tetsuya Nomura said this when asked about how much creators should listen to fan response on social media. Quote, "Players' perspectives are very interesting, and I find myself learning a lot from them, so it's certainly something I look closely at. As for reflecting those opinions in one's work, I don't think doing so is necessary at all. The key is not just to go along with players' opinions, but to think about the scenario clearly with intent." And in another interview with Anime News Network,
follow through, man.
Rebirth director Naoki Hamaguchi said this about the ending. Quote, "In terms of the fan experience we anticipated and also desired, I think we are satisfied in that there are both negative and positive reactions to this scene. Given all of the in-game evidence that they're still playing with the concept of fate, some fairly reliable signals that remake players largely approved of the new direction, as well as the lead creators behind the project saying they don't fully follow fan feedback and were anticipating and willing to receive negative reception to the way they handled FF7's most iconic scene, it seems to me that there is no reason to believe the developers changed their mind."
Right.
And just in case you still think I'm wrong and feel like they've backed away from changing fate, then I ask you this. Why did the official story recap that was released a week before launch and included right on the home screen ends by talking almost exclusively about breaking fate?
This was Destiny's crossroads. Every moment, every action, every step taken had all been as the Whispers willed it. To fight them was to break free. On the other side of fate, Sephiroth waited, the Whispers undulating within him. Cloud brought his blade down upon his rival, sundering destiny. With the fight won, and the shackles of destiny broken, we stood before the unknown, a world of boundless freedom. It was there, beyond where fate could follow, that a new journey began.
So, if they still plan to create a new journey beyond where fate could follow, then why did it feel like Rebirth ran away from the idea of changing fate?
Because so much of the game's the same.
So this is really not a sequel. It's the second act. It's of an ongoing story. It's not even a series as such. It's just a story that we show in parts.
Aside from the simple fact that it's also the middle installment of a trilogy, there is a good reason people have been comparing Rebirth to The Empire Strikes Back since before its release. Empire has a famously unexpected ending that feels like a low point for the characters, and it is a clear cliffhanger that leaves audiences waiting for the full payoff of taking down Darth Vader. Again, in case you aren't a big Star Wars fan, Empire Strikes Back constantly comes up as the top-rated Star Wars film among fans, and while I surprisingly couldn't find any poll about Star Wars endings, it's often listed among the best endings and usually comes out on top of most lists. So, given the similarities between the two, why isn't Rebirth's ending as revered as Empire's? Well, for one, when actually digging through the history, it turns out that the ending of The Empire Strikes Back wasn't as universally loved in 1980 as it is now. At the time, lots of critics gave it some pretty harsh criticism. The New York Times review led with the title, quote, "The Empire Strikes Back strikes a bland note," and said, "The Empire Strikes Back isn't even a complete narrative. It has no beginning or ends. After approximately 2 hours, Han Solo, Leia, and Luke are no better off than they were at the beginning."
And what's the difference going to end up being? Because we have a third film that at this point has been out well after most of us have been born, you know? So we don't remember what it was like. Obviously, we wouldn't know what it was like when they came out and dropped initially. We just have the idea of this part in a trilogy. So we just essentially, we're willing to accept it because we know that's not really the end, and appreciate it for being thought-provoking as opposed to, well, fuck, man, where the hell's it gonna go from here? You know, like, well, now I gotta wait. The hell? That's just like, it's almost like it's the middle portion to a story.
Which led them to conclude that it was, quote, "simply another chapter that appears to be continuing not onward and upward, but sideways." The Washington Post said it had, quote, "no plot structure, no character studies, let alone character development, and no emotional or philosophical point to make." Pauline Kael, probably the most famous critic at the time, was much more positive about it overall, but did critique that it felt weighed down as a quote, middle bridging film chained to an unresolved plot. This fairly widespread criticism was such a known element that it became something reporters asked fans as they were waiting in lines for the movie across the country.
Think this is going to be as big as Star Wars?
Bigger.
And yet a lot of the critics are panning it.
Well, what do they know?
Although the critics are disappointed, consumers looking for an escape into fantasy this summer will have the last word.
And sure enough, fans themselves walked out saying they really enjoyed the movie as a whole, but didn't quite have the same feelings about the ending.
Left me confused. Didn't understand any of it.
Oh, I thought it was pretty good. I didn't like the ending. It could have been a better ending. Okay, you just came out of the movie. What do you think?
It was a fantastic movie. They cut it short, though. There was no real ending to it. But it was a great movie. Great movie. A lot of things happen fast.
Yeah.
A lot of things happen very fast.
As it turns out, the ending for Empire Strikes Back may be something that people appreciated over time rather than in the moment. And a big reason for that is because, much like with Rebirth, some fans walked in with certain expectations out of what they expected from the second installment.
It still didn't end up right. You gotta see another one. It might be a Star Wars 3, you know? They didn't kill Darth Vader.
People were expecting certain things. They wanted and expected even more out of Han Solo. They were expecting a more classic love story between Luke and Leia, not yet realizing that they were siblings. And of course, they were even expecting Luke to win, rather than end up like this. But as Vincent Valentine so wisely and appropriately put it before entering the Temple of the Ancients,
expectations often lead to disappointment.
That said, while Empire's ending may not have been so beloved at first, it did do something that FF7 Rebirth did not. In Empire, Luke Skywalker spends the movie wrestling with both his destiny and his past. The question of who he is, who his father was, why he's special, and what he will do with his gift is central to the story. By the end of Empire, he's given an answer.
Obi-Wan never told you what happened to your father.
He told me enough. He told me you killed him.
No. I am your father.
Ba-ba-bum.
It's the one he and the audience least expect, but at least it was an answer to the story's main question. Who is Luke? Where is he from? And how might that impact his future? In Rebirth, the central question seems to be, as reiterated at the start of the game, middle of the game, end of the game, and even in the marketing, will Aerith live or die? And while there is seemingly an answer, it is one that is deliberately obscured. It is not as clean as this.
Right.
Luke.
Father.
Son, come with me.
And by that measure, it isn't very satisfying, even among fans like me who have changed their mind over time.
I just missed the end. Hope you enjoyed the ending. I didn't. I don't know if I liked it as much on first view. I was more confused and I'd say dissatisfied. I didn't hate it, but my interpretation was I was fucking confused. To me, it was like too much information hit me way too fast. I don't know what's going on, man. It almost doesn't feel like an ending. I'm super in. I'm super in.
Wrestling with the ending in that way isn't flip-flopping. It's just the outcome of handling a story, especially a story that we know, this way, and giving us a cliffhanger that doesn't work like a lot of traditional cliffhangers. That's because while cliffhangers can't answer everything, they aren't typically so open to interpretation. They usually leave you wondering what will happen next, and not what just happened.
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually a really good way to put it. You're not thinking about it in a way of like, you're trying to piece together what you just saw as opposed to using what you saw to understand what happens afterwards, you know? That doesn't happen very often.
What in the hell is going on?
What the fuck?
But here's the thing. So much of that confusion is about the events surrounding Aerith's death. But is Aerith's death really what Rebirth is all about?
However, you'll never see the truth with such clouded eyes.
Shut up!
After all, you're just a puppet.
clouding of our eyes. Okay.
Most stories contain many different plot lines, A plots, B plots, C plots, and so on, and their designation usually reflects their importance. In Empire Strikes Back, the A plot is clearly about Luke's training and the showdown with Darth Vader, while the B plot is about Han and Leia. They intersect and impact one another, but the questions about Luke are at the heart of the film, and it's the questions about his plotline that are the focus of the ending. In Rebirth, the A plot starts out about Cloud, but seems to end up being equally about Aerith, despite the final scene truly being about Cloud's mental state. On paper, lead writer Nojima did the right thing. The true opening, minus the prologue, is a questioning of Cloud's memory, and the ending deepens that suspicion, going so far as to drive distrust and fear of Cloud's mental state both in players and the party. But the larger meta story of Remake has shifted all of our focus as fans. We've become obsessed with the idea of changing fate, and for good reason. And so the hanging question over this trilogy has become, how will fate change? And the number one fate fans are concerned with doesn't really have to do with Cloud. In the long run, he'll be fine. He may be depressed for a couple of years, but he'll be fine.
That's fine.
It isn't really even about the end of the game. Sure, stopping Sephiroth and the meteor in the same way comes with some unintended side effects, but it's eventually dealt with and everyone is cured. No, the main concern is with Aerith. With her fate already on our mind since the end of Remake, and with so much build up to the final moment that includes an all-out assault of foreshadowing, multiple goodbyes, a seemingly omniscient Sephiroth hinting that he knows what he's about to do, and a literal pause in the action for the game to say, yeah, that shit's coming. We finally reach the altar, and what do we get? Fate isn't changed. And as seen through the lens of Zack's story, perhaps it never can be. Perhaps we're all doomed to our fates one way or another. Perhaps the big bombastic ending to Remake where we fought the granddaddy of Destiny was just a big fireworks show with no follow-through. Perhaps what people have been seeing as this bold, ambitious meta-sequel masquerading as a remake really is just a remake, with a few extra sprinkles on top. That isn't to say that my personal hope was for Aerith to survive. Personally, I wasn't one of the people cheering when Cloud parried Sephiroth's attack. Even though there was enough talk of changing fate to justify it, it felt like they hadn't fully earned it. So I was a bit relieved when events were flipped on us moments later. That said, it turns what should be a very emotional moment into a rug pull. Psych, we're not actually gonna let you save her. And in turn, it makes the whole premise of changing fate and the very in-your-face narrative focus of the first two games of this trilogy feel equally like a red herring. And while many people, including me, believe the truth will come back around in part 3 for a big reveal that impacts the primary plotline, the Cloud-censored A-plot, it will simply do so in ways that will lead to a similar, if somewhat different, mental breakdown for Cloud, just as he experienced in the original. At this very moment in time, that makes it feel like all of the new stuff that has driven so much conversation and excitement for nearly half a decade has been much ado about nothing. Sephiroth and Aerith knowing the future in ways they never did in the original, Cloud remembering Zack, Zack appearing to survive, Tifa falling into Lifestream, all of the conversations about changing fate, the literal creation of new worlds upon breaking fate, self-aware references to Advent Children, all are just in service of keeping us fans on our toes while adding a bit of perspective to original plot points.
I think the question really is too, like, but why show that, right? Why do they even have that scene? That still gets me, right? So like, why did we show Cloud seemingly save her and then she just dies? Like that transition, like what? And that's where the confusion lies. Just like a light switch going off. Just, oh wait, no, sorry, I guess you whiffed or you missed or something. Like, and then it got back up and stabbed Aerith in the back. Like it's like, what happened there? Huh? What? Did part of his memory disappear or something? Like, what happened? Did he actually stop him and then something happened in between there that maybe changed his mind? But why do that, right? What's the point other than, I mean, do you think they really want to piss people off?
In fairness, that is what the developers have said is the purpose of all of this. But if you're like me, that feels like an underwhelming payoff to all of this potential. And it feels intuitively like some kind of betrayal of the way stories are supposed to work, even if you can't quite put your finger on exactly the reason why. If you feel that way, it's for good reason. And so let's break down the real question this video has been building to. If I'm right, that the developers didn't change their mind about changing fate, then why did Rebirth end the way it did, with Aerith still dying? Why did they create the world's most obvious Chekhov's gun if there was no plan to fire it when it would have seemingly mattered most?
Is it really a sequel? Okay, what you got to say about this?
Especially after Rebirth, there has been good reason to believe things may all just play out more or less the same as they did in the original. A lot of these new elements, like Zack being alive, appear to be constructed in a way that makes them temporary. For example, the worlds we've seen him in are said to inevitably fade away, and may only exist in Lifestream realities that aren't as fully tangible as they seem. So much so that he doesn't even appear in the pause menu while he's in your party at the end of the game. And while Remake and Rebirth have been awash in Advent Children imagery, moments, references, and even music, perhaps they are all just knowing nods to longtime fans and not evidence that the events of the Remake trilogy are a direct consequence of those future events. Just so everyone watching this is fully caught up to speed, there has been a long-running theory that FF7 Remake is effectively a sequel to the original compilation of Final Fantasy VII. This is based on the clear evidence that Sephiroth and Aerith in the Remake trilogy are working with knowledge of future events, which didn't happen in the original. I mean, perhaps Sephiroth knew some things, as he seemed to indicate at the Temple of the Ancients in the OG, but there wasn't any evidence Aerith did. In fact, Tifa even refutes that notion later in the game. Because of that, interviewers for the past 4 years have been asking the developers how the Remake trilogy will connect to Advent Children, and the developers have used some shifty language. In an interview with The Guardian in 2023, creative director Tetsuya Nomura said, quote, "If you play right through to the end, it will link up to Advent Children, so you don't need to worry about that."
Yep.
And in a bit of interesting editorializing, the newspaper noted that he said this with, quote, "a knowing smile." In an interview a couple of months later with Eurogamer, producer Yoshinori Kitase said this: "The overall storyline, the developments, will not go wildly out in a way that will not add up to Advent Children in the end. I don't think anyone wanted that. That's not what we're looking to create here." Interestingly enough, neither of those interviews stopped the speculation amongst fans, especially theory crafters, who pointed out that Remake technically already linked up to Advent Children. In the final chapter of Remake, it was already confirmed by the devs that the party fought the 3 Advent Children, who were described in the enemy intel as, quote, "an entity from a future timeline that is manifested in the present day. It fights with a sword to protect the future that gave shape to it." So not only did it seem like Sephiroth knew the future, but literal future entities from Advent Children showed up in order to, quote, "protect the future that gave shape to it." So even within the canon of Remake, Advent Children happened in the future. It had to have happened in order to actively protect itself. Not only that, but every future scene shown during the Whisper Harbinger fight was ripped right out of Advent Children. Even the scenes that were technically in the original were represented by their Advent Children version. So yeah, it already linked up and added up with AC, but it didn't mean that it would still literally lead up to it within the same chronology. After all, the Whispers fought to protect the future, and we fought to change that future. It's a compelling argument, but the reason there has been so much disagreement among fans is that there has continued to be evidence pointing toward the opposite belief, coming directly from the developers themselves. In the behind-the-scenes featurette before the theatrical re-release of Advent Children, Kitase said something that sounded like the strongest bit of evidence that Advent Children might actually still follow the Remake trilogy.
Yeah, I saw
Advent Children itself depicts the world after the original FF7, but the Remake project essentially also follows the major elements of the story of the original FF7. So timeline-wise, Advent Children's story should be positioned as one just beyond the story within the Remake project. That mention about where Advent Children sits along the timeline has been, so far, the most damning evidence that perhaps it still does come after the events of the Remake trilogy, which would mean this whole Remake fiasco won't change fate and everything will essentially play out the same way. And given how things in Rebirth more or less played out the same as they did in the original, and everything so far seems to be building toward Cloud just losing his mind once again, it would appear that the cards are stacked very differently as we sit here post-Rebirth compared to how things seemed to be at the end of Remake. In 2020, it really felt, to a lot of fans, like they were going to go wildly off script in Rebirth. And while there were some wild moments for sure, most things played out essentially the same. And when looking back on everything the devs have said, it feels like maybe they weren't trying to pull the wool over our eyes or misdirect us. Maybe they just really wanted to, quote, introduce new mysteries without straying from the original, as they've said repeatedly. Yet, something about that hasn't felt right to me. And I know, the odds are stacked against me, and I just outlined exactly how against me they are. But so many moments in Rebirth feel written as if to lead up to a new grand conclusion to the trilogy. You may be thinking that such a belief is coming from a place of personal preference, and I'm sure some of it is. But I'm also someone who has repeatedly said that I think the FF7 Remake trilogy will be more like the original than most assume, even in the days leading up to Rebirth. Yet, I do believe that given how much they have set up changing fate, they have to meaningfully pay off not only that premise from Remake, but all of the beautifully crafted moments in Rebirth that seem indicative of a story that will go beyond the bounds of the original. For instance, big parts of FF7 sequel fiction seem to have happened in Rebirth. In the book, On the Way to a Smile, Aerith continues to live on in the Lifestream, and describes wanting to get in touch with Cloud in order to warn him of Sephiroth's plans. As the book put it, she tried to think of some way to warn Cloud. As she pondered the problem, all of the other things she couldn't tell him rose anew in her spirit, vivid as life. There was also so much she wanted to tell him, but she never had known what to say or how. She hadn't troubled herself over this for a long time, and eventually she decided there was no point in thinking about it now either, unless she found a way to talk to him. And a bit later it continued, quote, she had seen what she needed to see, a glimpse of Sephiroth's intentions. He would begin by using others to act where he could not. Should she do the same? No, she thought. Even if that's possible, I don't want to appear before Cloud as someone else. I want him to see me as he knows me. Aerith's dream date in Rebirth feels like the ultimate manifestation of that dream. And as we know from the Cosmo Canyon NPC, these worlds are likely created from the unrealized dreams that linger in the Lifestream.
I've been reading a bunch of theories about this alternate world in the hope of going there someday. And over the course of my studies, I stumbled across a fascinating theory. It addressed the issue of what the Lifestream is, arguing that spiritual energy is actually a manifestation of our knowledge and memories. Like I said, it's a fascinating theory, but it's incomplete. What about our hopes and dreams? We remember those, don't we? So what if spiritual energy doesn't distinguish between our real, lived memories and the unrealized desires buried deep in our hearts?
With that in mind, I believe that dream date is where an Aerith from the Lifestream, one that is different from the one we see with the party while Cloud is unconscious, finally realizes the dream of seeing Cloud again, shares some of those, quote, other things she couldn't tell him as described in the book, talks about the bigger picture, and says something she had previously only been able to say in an indirect way in Advent Children.
I never blamed you. Not once. Whatever happens, don't blame yourself.
It was at this moment that I felt most confident that the grand conclusion of this trilogy would end up, at the very least, in a slightly different place, even if just emotionally. Just as Cloud is in a much different emotional state after Aerith's death in Rebirth compared to after her death in the original, I think that even if events largely play out the same way for the rest of the trilogy, the emotional state of the characters and the final endgame of the story will be notably different than in the original. After all, what's the purpose of manipulating Lifestream realities to finally tell Cloud not to blame himself if he just ends up still blaming himself 2 years later in Advent Children? It would seem pretty damn pointless. But I ask that not just because of the strength of the question itself, but because of a few other quotes from developers that people have potentially overlooked. In an interview in February, just before Rebirth's release, producer Yoshinori Kitase talked with the Spanish outlet Vandal about his mindset heading into the closing chapter of the FF7 Remake trilogy. In it, he said that after spending 30 years with these characters, he realized something. Quote, the more I work on it, the more I start to feel like I want to make all these characters happy. I want to give them a happy ending. Knowing that the end of the original is fairly ambiguous, and Advent Children doesn't exactly depict the characters or the wider world as being very happy after the events of FF7, this is one hint that there may be an intention to do something different. In fairness, I also have to point out that in the same interview, Kitase noted that it's not only up to him. Quote, the rest of the team also have to be taken into consideration, so it won't be all happiness and rainbows. But I just want to make them happy. But just like I don't believe the FF7 Remake trilogy has backtracked on the idea of changing fate, Kitase didn't backtrack on this idea when he once again reiterated this hope for the end of the trilogy in the official Rebirth Ultimania, published 2 months later in April 2024. Quote, on account of my age, this next game will probably be the last FF7 related work I'll be directly involved with. Of course, there's always a chance the world of FF7 will continue on in the future, but for now, this is the end of it. With that in mind, I hope Cloud and all the other characters will finally find happiness. Though we won't know how the story ends until it's actually finished, I'm personally wishing that it will conclude without any unresolved feelings remaining. That note about not leaving these characters with any unresolved feelings just stuck itself into my brain, especially since Advent Children is almost entirely about the effects of the unresolved feelings Cloud carries. Not to mention that he once again says we won't know how the story ends, which seems a lot like the cliffhanger text that tells us no promises await at Journey's End. On the one hand, Aerith literally tells us the ending of the story as we know it, and it's the same one we know from the original game, which they supposedly aren't going to fundamentally change.
I'll put everything I've got into my prayers. I'll stop the meteor.
Yet, we're not supposed to know how it all ends. That doesn't quite add up, does it? What does start to add up, though, is another quote from Kitase. Just days before recording the script for this video, he was in another interview with Anime News Network where he said this, quote, we've always kept the original in mind, and I don't think it's going to be a storyline that will betray the fans of the original game. But also, at the same time, it's been 27 years since the release of the original Final Fantasy VII. There are these things that we feel we can only do now in the remake project that can bring a new happiness, a new sort of feeling of satisfaction to the players playing this game now 27 years later. What this will entail exactly is something we hope players will experience soon. If all they're doing is keeping the story mostly the same, then why would he have to clarify that it won't betray fans of the original? Usually you say that if you're planning on doing something that might feel like a betrayal, something that would be considered pretty damn different. And most importantly, he talks about wanting to give people a, quote, new happiness, a new sort of feeling of satisfaction for players who have been with them on this journey for nearly 30 years. To me, that is the clearest signal that the end of this trilogy won't just be Aerith stopping the meteor, like she did in the original and like she says at the end of Rebirth. In fact, given how it keeps saying that this remake project feels like a story of dualities, two seemingly different things being true at once, perhaps the true answer is that it will be a bit of both. It will include all of the major elements we know, but then go beyond that point, reaching a new conclusion without breaking what has already been. And there was a quote from a June interview with co-director Motomo Toriyama.
So, I mean, just sort of saying on that note, I think that's essentially what this series has been so far, right? It still is essentially the same story, right? Just sprinkled in there with things that are different, but leading to essentially the same outcome, right? I still feel like, I mean, personally, I think a lot of these quotes about Advent Children and the fact that it's like, well, this leads into Advent Children. It's because it does. That's the idea, right? They're like, at no point are the creators of this, have they ever actually said that this is a sequel? They have not said that any of that, but like, that's also the whole mystery of the game, bro, right? The whole backbone of this remake project is essentially this question and this mystery. So yeah, if they're saying that this story, if it continues as it is, just as it did in the original, continues as all the way to its conclusion, yes, it's going to lead into Advent Children because that's the way it was originally. But I don't think it's going to be the same ending. I think the idea is that this is going to end and eliminate Advent Children. Because what is the original ending of the story? They stop Meteor, which is great, but then they flash forward into the future and show that humanity essentially seemingly potentially dies off, right? With Red and his kids. Like, Midgar is destroyed and everyone is gone. Was happiness obtained there or attained there? So, yeah, this isn't to me just, I'm not really worried that it's going to end up just being like, oh, it was all smoke and mirrors and we were just screwing with you. This is just the same game told again. Because there's just like too many things in the game, too much effort put into these other narratives to think that it would just be the exact same thing again. But is it still mostly going to be the same? Yeah, more than likely. It's just, but it's going to have new context for scenes, right? I think even Cloud's Awakening is going to have much more context because it's not just the events that happened in this game that is seemingly influencing characters anymore, right? It's the decisions that were made in all the things that may have come beforehand, like the original FF7 and Advent Children and all of its spin-off stuff. So,
where he talks about something that sounds a whole lot like that very idea. Quote, "We would like to bring you a moving and impressive ending, which will answer all the mysteries in Rebirth and exceed the original game." Maybe that's the answer. Maybe most of what we know will remain, but they will exceed what we know about how the original ends. It would be a way for them to honor the original while still taking the big finale of this trilogy into all new territory where they will be free to get a little crazy. So in that spirit of getting a little crazy, let's talk about why I think that Rebirth veering away from changing fate makes it even more likely that Part 3 will finally veer into it. And to do that, we need to talk about the structure of stories.
Okay, so we're about halfway into this. I do just want to say real quick, this is interesting, this is very interesting, but I will say nothing yet has truly felt like a big revelation yet. Anything, I still feel like I haven't heard anything in this video that I feel like hasn't already been discussed to death to some extent. Granted, well, he did say that this first half of this video was meant to discuss mainly the past, and it's more just a clarification as to the intents of the developers that this is actually intended to hit in a way that's different from the original, right? It's good, it's interesting, and it's well written, but I feel like this is already something that I wasn't really worried about, I guess, personally. I think this is more for the people who are feeling that this is just a plot that's been pivoted a bunch of times. So, but all right, now what?
Sometimes I don't even know who I am. It's like there's different people inside of me. And the worst part is, I can't even tell where they end and I begin. Soldiers' cells degrade. I think that's what's happening to me. That I'm falling apart.
Restructuring a remake.
Earlier in this video, I said the developers are far more concerned with the full trilogy experience than the experience of each individual game. So let's talk about the full experience of this story. Most stories are divided into 3 acts. The 3 acts are often categorized as Act 1, the setup, Act 2, the confrontation, and Act 3, the resolution. Within each of those acts are a few major tentpole moments. The inciting incident, defined as the event that introduces the main conflict of the story and sets everything in motion. The Act 1 break, a significant event that could often be seen as the moment where our heroes cross the threshold. The midpoint being a crucial moment that changes the direction of a story. Then there's the climax, the falling action, the denouement, and so on and so forth. Odds are that nearly any story you've witnessed in any form, but particularly TV, film, and story-based video games, more or less follows the structure in one way or another. Especially since it's a bit intuitive. It essentially boils down to the classic once upon a time structure, where a hero is living life one way until a certain event upends everything and pushes him on a new journey that has significant challenges and setbacks until he grows and reaches his happily ever after. Interestingly, the construction of the FF7 Remake trilogy doesn't neatly map to the 3-act structure in the way you would assume, with Part 1 covering the entire first act, Part 2 covering the entire second act, and Part 3 covering the entire third act. Way back in 2017, Cosmo Canyon Observatory made a video where it tried to predict how many parts the FF7 Remake trilogy would be. And to help guide their thinking, they mapped the original story against the traditional 3-act structure. And spoiler, they correctly predicted it would be 3 games. In that exercise, they had categorized Aerith's death as the midpoint of the entire story. and the reunion at the Northern Crater as the Act 2 break, also sometimes referred to very plainly as Plot Point 2. Because of that, they thought Part 2 would end at the Northern Crater, which is something some fans, such as myself, hoped would serve as the ending of Rebirth, given that it would perfectly bookend the game by starting out with Cloud telling his version of what happened in Nibelheim and ending with Sephiroth revealing that story to be a lie.
And this is where a lot of us, like, we all thought it was likely going to end at the Northern Crater, right? And because it also marks basically at the moment that is the party's lowest, right? Where just everything has just gone to shit. It seemed like the good spot to potentially end it, but then they didn't. They ended up earlier than that, with Aerith's death specifically. So why?
Leading to Cloud's mental break and betrayal of the party. It will leave the story at a more natural cliffhanger point, with Cloud's unreliable memory exposed, Cloud himself fully manipulated and lost to Sephiroth, and Meteor summoned, leaving the fate of the planet in question as players looked up at the big death rock seen in the game's logo. In other words, it would be closer to the experience of The Empire Strikes Back, more of a clean closed loop that starts with Luke on the path to become a Jedi like his father, but ends at a point where he's bested despite all of his training and learns that the path of his father was something completely different. Instead, Rebirth only went up to the midpoint of the FF7 story as we know it, choosing a moment that straddles both Cloud's story and Aerith's fate in a way that doesn't feel as cleanly centered around his arc as, say, Luke Skywalker's. Unpacking the thematic reason behind that, beyond the obvious fact that Aerith's death is FF7's most famous moment, may provide some interesting insight as to what they believe the broader theme of the remake trilogy is and why the handling of the altar scene may turn out to be brilliant by the end of it all. Specifically, there is something very interesting that tends to happen at the midpoint of most stories that is in line with why FF7 Rebirth didn't change fate in the way fans expected.
Final Fantasy VII Reverse. Regerts. Okay.
The second act is called The Turn. The magician takes the ordinary something and makes it do something extraordinary. Now, you're looking for the secret, but you won't find it. Because, of course, you're not really looking. You don't really want to know. I want to be fooled.
To help understand why Rebirth's ending even better sets up a Part 3 where fate may change, we have to reference something from 2,300 years ago, Aristotle's Poetics. Don't be scared. I know, I'm going into Greek philosophers and I'm already probably 40 minutes into this video, but I'll keep it brief. In Poetics, Aristotle's seminal work about the structure of stories that many writers still reference to this day, he wrote that a plot has artistically constructed incidents, the most powerful of which are reversal of the situation and recognition scenes. He goes on to describe them this way. A reversal of the situation is a change by which the action veers round to its opposite, while recognition, as the name indicates, is a change from ignorance to knowledge.
Parasite, that movie was pretty good.
In layman's terms, a reversal of the situation is as it sounds. It's a reversal of where we think a story is headed or is about, while recognition is a moment of
that's a good one. The Gone Girl.
A profound realization by the protagonist. Both sound like a perfect description of the two moments we're facing. The end of Rebirth, where the concept of changing fate is reversed on us, and the moment we're looking forward to most in Part 3, when Cloud recognizes the truth of everything in the Lifestream sequence. As an interesting little factoid, the title for FF7 Rebirth in the original Japanese katakana also literally means the word reverse. And the idea of using a reversal in the middle of a story to challenge the story's main idea is found in so many lessons and conversations about storytelling amongst writers. The famous screenwriting instructor Robert McKee, who literally wrote a book titled Story, calls this the counter idea, which he describes as the contradictory voice of the primary theme.
So I think I see where he's going with this. Trying to prove the idea that we've reached the end of this game, right? And everything leading up to this point was that fate should be that fate could be changed, that the future wasn't written in stone, that we are the masters of our own destiny, only for it to essentially reverse back to what it was and always has been, which is Aerith's death, and that nope, it actually can't be changed despite what you might try to do. So I think this idea is that was introduced here to instill in us that kind of like despair that there's no real actual point in trying to fight this counterforce, you know?
As he puts it, this is basically about showing both sides of a theme, which he describes as, quote, a controlling idea, one clear, coherent sentence that expresses a story's irreducible meaning. But to reach that ultimate meaning, a writer has to take the audience on a journey where that true idea, the real meaning and whole point of the story, comes through only at the very end, after it's been put to the test and earned. Quote, you have to build a bridge of story from the opening to the ending, a progression of events that spans from premise to controlling idea. These events echo the contradictory voices of one theme. The positive idea and the negative counter idea argue, so to speak, back and forth, creating a dramatized dialectical debate. At climax, one of these two voices wins and becomes the story's controlling idea. While controlling idea is kind of a strange phrase, it is ultimately what a story is about. Perhaps an even clearer articulation comes from the Chernobyl and Last of Us writer Craig Mazin, who calls it a story's central dramatic argument.
Theme is your central dramatic argument. Then the important thing is that the argument has to be an argument. I think sometimes people misunderstand the use of theme in this context, and they think a theme for a screenplay could be brotherhood. Well, no, because that's nothing to argue about there. There's no way to answer that question one way or the other. It's just a vague concept. But men and women can't just be friends? Well, that's an argument. Better to be dead than a slave. Life is beautiful even in the midst of horrors. If you believe you are great, you will be great. If you love someone, set them free. Those are arguments.
Just like McKee explained, that argument is then debated back and forth. McKee called it idea and counter idea, but different storytellers and even different storytelling traditions call it different things.
Yeah, it's what makes a lot of movies so compelling is the idea that what you have been seeing up to that point isn't actually what the movie is, right? That's why I actually think that the Shim showing Gone Girl, for example, was a really good call, because the whole movie leads you to believe a certain truth, only for it to literally, like halfway into it, essentially completely 180. And that's just that feeling of like, what the hell? Whoa. Like that is always a lot of times released to very engaging narratives, you know, where you feel like you're seeing a secret truth that you weren't meant to see, you know? Like one thing is the thing that was shown on the news and what is essentially been told to us, while the other is the actual truth that really happened that nobody knows but the people that were involved.
Mazin, for example, explains it this way.
You take a thesis, that's a statement. Something is true. And then you apply to that an antithesis. No, that's not true, and here's why. Those things collide, and in theory, what results from that is a new thesis called the synthesis.
In truth, neither the thesis nor antithesis are correct, but exploring both extremes is necessary in order to drive both excitement and doubt in an audience. That's essentially what's happening in Rebirth. Remake provided us with a thesis. It's possible to change fate. And Rebirth explored the antithesis. Perhaps fate can't actually be changed.
Yeah.
If the Remake trilogy is following this fairly universal exploration of theme, then it's unlikely either idea is fully correct, and will instead come to a head in part 3, where a third idea emerges, the synthesis, which is defined in this way. Quote, the synthesis is the resolution of the conflict between the thesis and the antithesis. It combines elements of both to create a new situation, idea, or understanding that transcends the original conflict. The synthesis often represents the character's growth, a new equilibrium, or a transformed worldview.
You know what that actually reminds me of too? Similar idea. Danganronpa 2, right? Or was it 3 specifically? The idea that it's like we're led to believe that it's this constant battle between hope and despair, right? And in the end, they introduced the idea of the future, right? Like I'm looking towards the future and not focusing on this thing, right? What we think is what the characters, the bad guys seem to think that is actually the real like confrontation here. No, I find this other option, right? To get around all of that.
That is what I believe we are bound for. Some unseen middle ground that comes out of the debate between whether fate can be changed or not. The unseen part is incredibly important because all good endings must feel unexpected even if they appear inevitable in hindsight. So it's important that the antithesis, aka counter idea, seems almost immovable and impossible to overcome. McKee describes that idea this way, quote, "If your film ends up favoring one particular side of the argument, amplify the sequences that lead the audience to feel the opposite. If a story is about the idea that justice will triumph, then enhance the sequences expressing the idea that crime wins." Everywhere you look, you will see these moments of thesis and antithesis playing out across all kinds of stories. As an example, at the beginning of the original Star Wars trilogy, there is a new hope that the Rebel Alliance may have enough people power and belief to overthrow the Empire, especially with the help of Luke Skywalker, until the Empire Strikes Back reverses the forward momentum of the story, showing how difficult it would be to actually take down the Empire, especially if Vader is able to convince his son Luke, the Rebels' strongest asset, to join the dark side. But ultimately, Luke helps usher in the return of the Jedi, when Vader comes to recognize the worst outcome of the path he's chosen, the potential death of his son, and makes a decision to kill the Emperor, thus dissolving the Galactic Empire itself and finally delivering on the hope the rebels held at the start of the story. And if you notice, Luke didn't actually have to beat Darth Vader to topple the Empire, the thing he tries and fails to do in the second movie. Instead, he needed to save him. It's a new idea, a synthesis. I know it's been a lot of Star Wars, but I figured I would keep up that comparison for consistency's sake. Another example that may be even more appropriate might actually come, weirdly enough, from The Matrix. Before I get into that, however, a couple of quick caveats. I know Star Wars and The Matrix aren't exactly high art, but since they're mainstream movies largely about fate and identity that most people have seen, they work really well as comparison points.
Hey. No, I don't know about that. I'd say The Matrix is definitely fucking, I don't know, man. Yeah, I mean, it's pop. It's got, you know, action thriller stuff, but dude, there's some poignant ass shit in fucking The Matrix. And I mean, even to an extent, I mean, that's what I think makes the original Star Wars trilogy so good. At least the first two movies really feeling good, is that it's maybe simple themes and narratives done and executed really well. I don't know, man. I think Matrix is like one of the greatest movies ever made, and I think it has got some truly like kind of groundbreaking themes for the time.
It's also important to note that while I've been referencing a lot of Western storytelling theories, Final Fantasy is a Japanese story, and there may be some potential cultural differences. While I can't speak to them in great detail, I did look into it a bit while researching this, and while there are certainly some differences, particularly in how Japanese stories may sometimes be more contemplative than conflict-driven, there are similarities between the overarching structures as well as concepts that are very similar to the ideas I've talked about, like reversals and antitheses, such as the idea of the Ten and the Kisho Tenketsu story structure. Now that I've gotten those caveats out of the way, let's talk about The Matrix. At the midpoint of that movie, the antithesis is presented. Neo visits the Oracle that Morpheus so believes in, and she tells Neo that he isn't the one. That throws the premise, or thesis, from the start of the film, that Neo is the one who will control the Matrix, into potential jeopardy. But just like when Aerith says the line, quote, "The future, even if it's been written, can be changed," in a way that feels like it leaves the door to change cracked ever so slightly open, the Oracle also doesn't fully shut the door on the idea that starts the movie.
Sorry, kid. You got the gift.
Maybe in another life.
But it looks like you're waiting for something.
What?
Your next life, maybe.
Yep.
Who knows?
Yep.
As we all know, Neo does in fact become the one, but it doesn't happen until all belief in that destiny is ripped out of almost everyone, including Morpheus and the audience, when Neo is shot dead, because that's what stories do. They aren't worthwhile if the ending we expect is easily obtained. The challenge with Rebirth is that people were expecting to reach that point with this ending, but this isn't the ending to the story. This is just the midpoint, This is the Oracle telling us that the idea we walked in with isn't quite right, and saving Aerith's life isn't the fate that needs to be changed. In fact, Aerith tells us this herself.
This isn't about me, though. It's about saving the world. And you. So thank you, Cloud, for everything.
What is this?
It's been fun.
Aerith!
The real goodbye with Aerith.
Careful now. That which lies
ahead
does not yet exist. Our world will become a part of it one day, but I will not end. Nor will I have you end.
This is...
the edge of creation.
Yeah. Literally the plot point, right? This whole thing here of creation's edge of 7 seconds till the end, this whole thing does not get touched upon seemingly at all in Rebirth. Like, this is seemingly like not even touched. We still don't know what any of this shit means.
Although most people are confused about what happened with Aerith, there is generally very little confusion about the reasons for this ending. The biggest reason is not only glaringly obvious, but also something the developers have openly talked about even as recently as in the days leading up to the recording of this video. It's to keep us confused and talking for the next 3 or so years.
What the hell's that?
The other narrative reason that we can all agree on is that this ending is meant to deepen the unreliable nature of Cloud's mind, to make him believe not just a false version of the Nibelheim events, but also a false version of what happened at the Forgotten Capital. But as I mentioned earlier, if the reason is just to send Cloud into a mental breakdown, an event that already happened in the original solely with the misremembered events of the Nibelheim incident, then why would they have to make Cloud also misremember Aerith's death? I believe it relates to what may be the primary theme of the remake trilogy, the central dramatic argument or controlling idea or whatever you want to call it. Sitting here right now, I don't know what that will be exactly, but this is my current best guess based on the ideas the remake games have been exploring. As of today, I'm pretty certain the overarching theme of this game will involve at least one or all three of these elements: strength, control, and acceptance, and they may all intersect in some way. We will end by talking about acceptance, which is probably the primary idea at the end of all of this, and partially the most obvious. So let's start with the other two first: strength and control. The concept of what strength is seems like it will be core to the FF7 Remake trilogy. For one, Cloud's insecurities and challenges are driven by perceived weakness. In the original, his failure to make it into Soldier is a defining moment. He saw Soldier as a way to become someone, a hero like Sephiroth, but he fails and guards that secret with great shame. And yet, despite not having the superhuman, alien-enhanced strength of Genova cells like other soldiers who challenge him, despite not even being seen as fit to be a soldier, it is Cloud who accomplishes what no one else can by facing and killing Sephiroth in Nibelheim. Still, it's this internalized weakness which Cloud carries that Sephiroth keeps digging into. In Remake, right after the fall of the Sector 7 plate, Sephiroth pierces this topic very directly.
You have failed again, I see. But through suffering, you will grow strong. Isn't that what you want?
And then later, at the Edge of Creation, Cloud challenges Sephiroth, perhaps emboldened by his success in the fight against him in the Singularity, but fails. He isn't strong enough. In the Gongaga scene with Tifa in Rebirth, we see Cloud truly question himself for the first time. How could he be a hero, the embodiment of someone who is strong, when he is so weak that he can't save Tifa seemingly at any point, either from their fall from Mount Nebel as kids, or even from himself after being influenced by Sephiroth? That's because Cloud has a very specific idea of strength, one that doesn't really apply to him. In fact, Nomura goes so far as to marvel at Cloud's weakness in the behind-the-scenes documentary for Advent Children.
クラウドってめちゃめちゃ多分弱い男なんで、子供の見るものの大半っていうのはすごいヒーローっていうのは強くてかっこよくてっていうその弱いところはないっていう、なんてこう情けないんだろうっていうふうに。
Another reason it feels like this idea will be explored toward the end of the remake trilogy is because it's currently being explored in the new Ever Crisis episodes about young Sephiroth. There is a surprising amount of conversation about strength and weakness. Sephiroth bemoans those who are too weak to do what's necessary, and toward the end of the Rador arc, Rosen says something very similar. Becoming stronger is celebrated in the world of FF7, so much so that Cloud seems to consistently view it as the solution to everything. He even thinks it can help the Lifestream.
Got a question. Planet runs out of energy. It and everything on it dies, right?
Yes.
There any way to avoid this? Like, making the spiritual energy stronger?
But there appears to be a misunderstanding about what strength is, as Aerith talks about at the Temple of the Ancients.
And that's because Cloud he's a child, basically, you know? He still is in his head. So what he sort of has always valued as real strength isn't really... He never understood what that meant. What it actually means to be strong, right? Which is what made Advent Children sort of frustrating in some ways, because it felt like so much of it was sort of backpedaling a bit. Because that seemed like something that he realized. And ooh, that thought actually. Right? Maybe that's the point, right? Maybe the idea was that, no, he didn't realize that at the end. That's why Advent Children happened. So maybe what we're trying to say here is this time he will understand it. And so that Advent Children doesn't happen.
Interestingly, the localization of this speech differs quite a bit from the source Japanese, as illuminated by my friends over at Shinra Archaeology Department. While the official English localization has Aerith define strength as forgiveness, a more direct translation of the Japanese dialogue talks about something a bit different. Quote, "Sadness and anger may make us stronger, but they change who we are. I believe true strength is different from that. It's something we carry in our hearts, something soft but unbreakable. That's what I think. So focus on the future, not the past. We can become even stronger than Sephiroth, far stronger." Soft but unbreakable may be the truest description of Cloud. In On the Way to a Smile, Aerith talks about needing to get Cloud's help to stop Sephiroth once again, but fears doing so could hurt him. Quote, "Cloud will help me, I know he will, but I also know it will end up hurting him. The Cloud she knew had a heart so very easily wounded." That soft underbelly of Cloud is what gives him the strength he needs when he is pushed to the brink. When his town is burned, his friends are hurt, and he is on death's door, that soft, loving heart is what gives Cloud the willpower to do the impossible. But it also has the opposite effect. It can lead him to tremendous despair. But facing your darkest moments and thoughts, being pushed to a point of wanting to give up, is what makes Cloud such a genuinely human hero that we can all see ourselves in.
情けないんだろうっていうふうに思ってしまう面もあるような、ある意味すごい人間らしい人間というかキャラクターなんで、そういうヒーローっていうのはあれでも一応ヒーローなので、そこまでこうちょっと弱いリアルなヒーローっていうのはなかなかいないと思うんです。
Hell yeah, he's our little buddy.
見た人というか見た子供たちがともすれば情けない男でも、周りの要は仲間がいたり、その自分が大事なものっていうのが見つかれば強くなっていけるというか。
I think a lot of what is being shown in Ever Crisis about Sephiroth too is the false concept of strength, right? That Sephiroth, it's showing that Sephiroth like has this belief, essentially what Cloud sort of admires and thinks that is strength, right? Is that by shunning others, right? Essentially focusing on the self and being strong physically, strong mentally, just basically taking all of the brunt of punishment and of the challenge and everything yourself. That's strength, right? But it's gonna be essentially his undoing, likely, right? Because in the end of like what we saw in that moment at the end of the first part of Ever Crisis, where essentially he loses that friendship and that camaraderie that he had with the people with him, and seemingly that could have maybe saved him, right? But Cloud isn't alone.
It is that softness, that love for all he cherishes, that Sephiroth views as an illusion. It is diametrically opposed to Sephiroth's philosophy, which is a dynamic you always want between your hero and your villain, characters who are living, breathing embodiments of opposing viewpoints. And Cloud embracing who he truly is and seeing that as a source of strength rather than a source of shame is, in my opinion, the key to him doing what he couldn't do in Rebirth, finding a way to change fate, or rather, control it. The essential and defining moment in FF7, and certainly in Cloud's journey, is the realization of who he really is in the Lifestream sequence. Because in addition to being a story about life and death, FF7 is a story of self-actualization. And just like in our everyday lives, it is only possible to take control of your life once you come to terms with the truth of who you are and find strength in that. Yet while strength and weakness are directly discussed throughout the compilation and remake trilogy, the idea of control is found when you analyze the first two games a bit more closely. When looking at the long arc of this 3-game story, we start to see the first intersection between the concepts of strength and control way back in Chapter 2 of Remake.
You are too weak to save anyone. Not even yourself.
Sephiroth implies that at his core, Cloud cannot affect the change he wants. Not only will he be unable to save Aerith, but he won't even be able to save himself, which, given the events of the original game, is true. And though Sephiroth plants that seed, Remake smartly sidesteps it. After all, Cloud is the hero and you are playing as him. The devs needed you to believe in him, needed you to believe you could be a hero that can overcome any odds, so they can strip it away in the second game. And that's what Rebirth does. It begins to prove Sephiroth's point. Cloud can't save anyone. Even after defeating the Harbinger of Fate and creating the possibility of literal, reality-breaking change, Cloud reaches a point of not believing he can.
I'm guessing you can't anymore, though?
Nope. Not even a bit. Whatever we had, I think the Whisperers took it from us when we left.
Huh.
Seems Arbiters of Fate can do whatever they want.
So you told us.
Oh, did I? Huh. I wonder if this means we'll eventually forget they even exist.
We'd be better off if we did, frankly. There's no point in wasting our time worrying about fate if we can't change it.
That lack of belief is likely driven by how Cloud perceives both his past and his future. Every time Cloud has tried to control the outcome of events, at least as far as he remembers, he fails. During the Nibelheim incident, he laments being knocked out by Sephiroth too long to make a difference. He then sees himself crawling too slowly to stop what happens to the villagers, just as he finds himself in the same exact position while trying to stop Aerith from going to the Forgotten Capital alone. And while having to wrestle with that past, Cloud has to move forward on a journey that serves as a constant reminder of his seemingly inevitable future. Cloud spends the entirety of Rebirth following the Hooded Men, ex-soldiers just like him who have been reduced from magnificent heroes to mindless husks. And he sees that transformation right before his eyes. This is his fate, no matter what.
There's no escaping the degradation. My friend.
Even worse, that fate isn't just inevitable, It's damn near imminent. Throughout Rebirth, Cloud loses control of himself, sometimes to a mindless daze, and at other times to the control of Sephiroth, just like the hooded men he's been following. And between flashes of the experiments done to him and the explanation by Dr. Sheeran, that future is all but a scientific and genetic certainty, as seen in the reunion vision from the gap between worlds. All of this leads to the final chapter where this belief is truly put to the test. As he stands at the altar and Sephiroth descends from the heavens, Cloud faces the moment of truth. Will Sephiroth be proven right that Cloud can't save anyone? If he were to ever seize control, this is the moment it must happen. And much to his surprise, and ours, he sees himself finally doing it, finally exerting control and saving someone. The thing Sephiroth said he was too weak to do. And it doesn't matter. Even when Cloud thinks he takes control, he doesn't. Which brings us to the final idea, acceptance. It is absolutely critical for Cloud to break free from his illusory world, as he calls it in the original, and the only way to do that is through full acceptance of the truth, of both the events he thinks he knows and his identity. As Marlene mentions to Zack, saving Cloud is necessary to change anything.
Cloud tries to save her, but he doesn't make it in time. He almost does, but he doesn't. That's why you have to make Cloud better. If he's sick, he can't save Aerith.
While her line is specific to saving Aerith, I believe this is a fundamental principle. If fate is going to be changed in any way, it is going to rely on Cloud accepting what has happened and who he is. Even though he comes to accept himself, accepting what has happened to him is a point he doesn't fully reach in the original. And that lack of acceptance is so powerful that it comes back around 2 years later, where Cloud struggles with accepting what happened, creates the conditions possible for Advent Children and Sephiroth's second return. That's because grief and regret are negative emotions Sephiroth and Jenova feed on.
So that's the idea, right? That's what I was just saying, is the idea that the original didn't really have maybe the happy ending that we sort of it seemed like it initially, right? And the fact that it led into the events of Advent Children, because he didn't accept that even after Aerith died, he didn't accept that what happened to her in a lot of ways, right? Because I let you die, right? You know, because I failed again, which is, again, like, I feel like you only realize that though in Advent Children, right? It's why it still feels like a backpedal to me in a lot of ways, but I guess that's the point, is that he doesn't actually do that. So the goal of this game is to get him to truly accept that Aerith's death is not his fault, that maybe some things can be changed, but others can, or it can't be changed, but other things can, you know? To be able to accept that his own weakness, right?
Aerith knows this, and it's why she worked to stop Cloud from having those emotions, as alluded to in the Ultimania. That is why Cloud must accept the truth. Self-actualization doesn't come through denial. There is
accepting what
curing
happened.
Cloud's sickness, as Marlene put it, until Cloud accepts the truth. And not only is that something that continually comes up among people making predictions about Part 3, but I believe it is something that the developers are aware people expect. And remember what I said about writers having to challenge the expected outcome with the most extreme opposite. That's where I believe Cloud's Dream World comes into play.
Sleep and dream the sweetest dreams.
Cool editing there.
At the start of the Chapter 14 Dream Date sequence, Aerith offers a point of clarity about what this world is.
Let's just call it a dream. My dream, to be precise.
I always found it interesting that Aerith made a point to clarify that this dream specifically belonged to her. It's an important detail though, because as far as we can tell, given the appearance of this stamp, this doesn't seem like any of the worlds we've seen Zack in throughout the rest of the game. And it burned a question inside of me. Why would it be important to distinguish dream worlds in general from dream worlds that are specific to someone? And as a note, she specifies that it's her dream in both English and Japanese. I think the importance will matter once Cloud finally reaches the point where he will have to confront the nature of his dream world, the world he created when he saved Aerith. There has been a lot of debate about whether Cloud actually created another world when he saved Aerith, with extra attention being given to the potential symbolism of things like rainbows. From what I've seen as the months have gone by, the fanbase at large seems to have come to the conclusion that he didn't, or that even if he did save her in some other world, it doesn't matter because the true narrative purpose is to portray Cloud in a state of denial. After all, the developers have even said as much. To quote Nomura, when you actually lose someone you cherish in the real world, you aren't able to accept it right away. This time, we strove to depict that inability to accept the loss of someone precious to you. And while that makes sense, the rules of these worlds have been genuinely pretty confusing to me. I still didn't feel clear about its implications, despite knowing that Nojima, the writer of this story, took inspiration from Carl Jung's idea of the collective unconscious, as well as Yogacara, a Buddhist idea most plainly described as a belief that reality is a mental construct. In general, they both made sense given the mental mind fuckery of the remake trilogy, but also even within the context of the original FF7, where Cloud's sense of reality really comes from what he personally believes rather than what objective reality is. In fact, the idea of an illusory world is not only spoken about by Cloud after the Lifestream sequence, but it's the literal description of the Whirlwind Maze version of Nibelheim, as Shinra Archaeology Department found in its recent retranslation of the original game. In it, Sephiroth says, quote, "The world I have shown you here is reality. This is history as it truly happened. The only one creating an illusion is you." But the reason it's confused me so much in this trilogy is because even if a place like Aerith's dream world is just a mental construct specific to her, then how can objects like the white materia be transferred to other worlds and seemingly keep their form for good in the quote-unquote real world? I think it's because the things in those worlds are real, even if they're bound to fade away, like Sephiroth explains. After all, the infamous Cosmo Canyon NPC makes a point that the Lifestream treats things that have happened and haven't happened as if they're the same.
What about our hopes and dreams? We remember those, don't we? So what if spiritual energy doesn't distinguish between our real, lived memories and the unrealized desires buried deep in our hearts?
And we get potential confirmation that it's real because we see it through the perspective of a third party, Tifa at the Forgotten Capital. While that pesky old Cosmo Canyon NPC dialogue has been referenced a lot as a general explanation of the alternate worlds, I've mostly seen people talking about the part I just played, where she describes the idea that the Lifestream may not distinguish between real, lived memories and unrealized desires. But I haven't seen many people talk about how the final lines of dialogue seem to perfectly describe what literally happens to Tifa.
What if coming into contact with that energy allowed us to peer through the looking glass, so to speak?
And a more direct translation of the Japanese dialogue reads even more clearly. Quote, "What if, when people accidentally come into contact with this energy, they see into other worlds?" I don't think it is any coincidence that these words were said in a game where Tifa accidentally came into contact with the Lifestream and then had a moment where she seemed to see two different events play out. Two different worlds, one with a bloody Aerith and one without. If Tifa is peering through the looking glass and seeing into other worlds, then it's likely that what she is seeing is Cloud's dream world. Just like Aerith had a world of her creation, Cloud has one of his own. He is, after all, the master of his own illusory world.
I see. That's a good point. essentially Cloud is manifesting his own desires into a reality. That's what she's seeing. The moment of actually seeing that we see of him stop it and save her, right, is just what he manifested himself of what he wanted to do or what he could do or should do, right? It's like building upon the same idea of his, who he, believing who he really is and who he really is, right? And who he was.
Even from the original. But just like the dream of being a first-class soldier is something Cloud had to give up when he accepted the truth in the OG, so too will he have to give up on the dream world he has created where Aerith lives on. It will make the point of acceptance even harder for Cloud and players. While we are all understandably unhappy about the exclusion of this moment where Cloud had to put Aerith to rest, the developers have done something that will make truly saying goodbye to Aerith even harder. By making these illusory worlds into things so real we can touch, coming to terms with actual reality will make saying goodbye so much harder. We will have the ability to have Aerith back in as real of a way as the white materia, but have to give up on that dream. It could make the thematic impact of acceptance even more real and visceral.
Yeah.
But I also think the path to that acceptance may have to be earned in an all new way. That's why, from here, I think there are a couple of unknown journeys the developers can take us on. First, I want to talk about the most bittersweet path. The path that would change the events of the third game most drastically, but arguably best serve the themes of life and death from the original game.
The cycle of life.
If Cloud did make a reality where he saved Aerith, Sephiroth could use this to his advantage. He could use it to tempt Cloud to accept a reunion of worlds that merges that reality with the one he wants to make. And he could sell Cloud that this new world is a good thing. After all, in Sephiroth's mind, he isn't creating anything bad. He's creating the Promised Land, the place where Cloud, in the original game, believes he can see Aerith again.
So Sephiroth is looking to change the world.
Fuck, dude.
Which he thinks will be a better world. He calls it the Promised Land. And that's very different to the kind of world that Cloud and his friends want to create.
That kind of an offer would be brutal for us and Cloud.
Fuck.
It would mean getting what we really want, but having to give in to Sephiroth to get it. But
oh man, that's actually kind of amazing. Oh fuck, that's actually really fucking cool. Holy shit. The idea that he made that world real, where a world where she isn't dead and she's still here. And then like the fucking devil on his shoulder being like, I can offer that to you. You just have to help me. You know, we can make that world a reality.
Giving it to Sephiroth is not something we could do. We would have to deny him and choose not to bring Aerith back. It would turn the act of accepting Aerith's death into an active choice, and a far more difficult one. Yet, as hard as that would be, it would make the theme of acceptance even more profound. By crafting Rebirth's ending the way they have put us in the shoes of Cloud more than ever. We are just as unsure of what's real as he is, Similarly, this approach would make it such that not only would Cloud have to come to a point of acceptance around Aerith's death, but so would we as players. But a major question remains. How would accepting Aerith's death and leaving her to the Lifestream lead to a new ending that exceeds the original? I believe the answer has to do, surprisingly, with the Gi. Again, let's think about the dialectical debate that happens in narratives, the ideas and counter-ideas, the theses and antitheses. Aerith and Sephiroth represent two different beliefs. Aerith believes in the cycle of life and death. Sephiroth doesn't. He wants to live on forever, which Aerith doesn't understand.
How can you want this, Sephiroth?
Be gone. Your part is played.
How can you want an eternity of loneliness?
This philosophical war continues in the years leading up to AVALANCHE.
Damn, I don't remember that one. Was that in the boss fight? Or was that from when they were talking in the...
Sephiroth refuses to dissipate fully into the Lifestream. Meanwhile, Aerith wants to, but she knows she can't, as long as Sephiroth lives on. To quote On the Way to a Smile, she was an ancient. Thus she was able to retain her own selfhood, even within the flow of the Lifestream. When she wished it, she could dissolve that self and become a part of the planet forever. But it was too soon for that. Just a little longer, she thought. She can feel an aberration in the coursing Lifestream, an implacable will that refused to merge with the planet. She knew it was the man who killed her.
Yeah, and that's how I believe this story will end, is with her, like, truly, just like as Sephiroth will truly be gone forever, Aerith will then truly also be gone, because she won't have to continue this, like, fight with him, you know? Like, Sephiroth will be dead. How that would happen, right? How exactly he would, so seemingly even death cannot claim him. He can still fight his way out of the Lifestream, right? It's almost like, in a way, is Sephiroth want what the Gi have, where he can just continue to exist forever, you know? Is that what he actually wants? Or does he actually want, or does he see what happened to the Gi as a curse as well? That this is fucked up, that the world is this way, that only those born of the Lifestream can return to the Lifestream, and these guys are stuck in perpetual, you know. I'm not sure. That's like, that I feel like we don't have enough information on, of like which one of those like ideas does he sort of favor. Is he truly looking only for himself? I think he's thinking, though, more beyond that. I think the real Sephiroth, that's not influenced by Jenova, that isn't Jenova specifically, right? I do feel that he is looking to do something that extends beyond just himself, because he believes he's doing something that is for the good of everybody, right? Granted, that is going to lead to, right, the conflict. And it's probably something that could lead to a way of life that is not better, right? Necessarily. It is a world where everyone could potentially live forever, even a good idea, really. I don't know. But that's the part of the reason we still don't actually know what he wants. We still don't really know exactly what Sephiroth's motivations are. I think that's what Ever Crisis is there to help us with, right? Is to understand those motivations, to understand who he is, which is why it sucks it's all in a fucking mobile game. But I think that I would like to think that his motivations extend beyond himself. He's not just about specifically self-preservation, that he wants to live forever, right? Just for that. And the reason why I say that, and sort of hope that too, is just because that leads to a much more fascinating moral question. Because the selfish Sephiroth of just himself focusing on that, well, I don't want to die, so if that's the rule of the world, I must break it. That's just kind of a basic idea, and the one that's very clearly wrong and selfish, right? But one that extends beyond that. Like, he sees himself as a hero that is trying to help others. That's the real, leads to a real moral quandary that makes it a much harder decision for us, the viewer, and for players, at least in my opinion.
Aerith has no issue with dying and returning to the planet. To her, it's the nature of things, the way things are supposed to be. But Sephiroth, well, he's the opposite. Sephiroth doesn't want to die. He doesn't want to be forgotten. He wants to create a new state of things. because he believes himself to be special, a descendant of Jenova, a being that can't return to the planet. For him, returning to the planet would mean not being special. It would just mean being yet another soul that can get recycled and stripped of its individuality. A horrifying fate. Aerith understands this and warns that disrupting the cycle would be disastrous.
What you heard just now were the voices of the planet. Those born into this world, who lived and who died, who returned. They're howling in pain. He'd tell you that he only cares about the planet, that he'd do everything in his power to protect and preserve it. But this isn't the way it's supposed to be. There's no greater threat to the planet than him. Sephiroth has to be stopped. He has to be. And that's why I'm asking you to help me. I know that together we can do this. But if we do, we'll be changing more than fate itself.
In the end, the cycle of life must be restored. And to fully do that, the planet must be rid of Jenova and Sephiroth. Sephiroth must be fully consumed by the Lifestream and not left to linger on as he does all the way through to Advent Children and potentially beyond.
Right. Because that's like, this moment here, right, is not just like her saying, well, we gotta kill Sephiroth, right? Like, but if things continue as the Whispers essentially ordained that fate was what it was, then it should lead to his death, but it doesn't, right? That's the idea. I think that's the idea of breaking fate, is that we defy the Whispers, because the solution that they ended up coming up with, that we ended up reaching in the original game, isn't a solution. It doesn't actually truly stop him. He's still there like a fucking virus. He cannot be destroyed. Not that way. That's, I think, the idea.
Because if he does, then it means Aerith must as well. It means she must constantly stay and clean up his corrupting influence over the Lifestream.
Yeah.
Again, from On the Way to a Smile. Quote, she discovered there were many more spirits than before who resisted merging in the Lifestream's eternal flow. They were not like him, but she sensed the same hate, the same anger in them that led him to reject the planet and its Lifestream. Whenever such souls enter the Lifestream, she tried to relieve them of their anger. Beneath the spite and rage would be the memories of an ordinary man or woman. She contrived to free those memories so they can move on and melt into the stream. And soon enough, the empty shell of hate that remained would dissolve too. She was pleased that she could help these souls, but she encountered more and more of them as time went on, and she found that she alone was not enough. For the past 27 years, the thought of Aerith living on in the Lifestream has been a comforting, if bittersweet, compromise. We never wanted to lose her, but if the consolation is that she is still around even after death, then that is something we've all been willing to accept to some degree. Yet, this afterlife, one where she has to constantly chase the corrupting influence of Sephiroth, is not right. It's not the way things are supposed to be. In fact, even if she didn't have to do that work, living on for eternity would not be ideal. And we know this because all you have to do is ask the Gi. They live on forever, unable to return to and dissolve into the Lifestream. And for them, that existence is hell.
Which means these dudes can't die, right? They're invincible!
I'm not sure that's something to celebrate. Being stuck as spirits with no hope of release sounds like a fate worse than death.
All they want, desperately, is actual eternal rest. Such rest is so desired that they came to call the Black Materia the key to complete oblivion, a materia of peace.
You know, it's funny. I found this idea of like people seeking like an immortality or something, right? You see it all the time in entertainment and fiction and things like that. This idea of finding immortality and stuff. But I think it's interesting when you really think about the idea of truly becoming immortal, like how actually terrifying that would be. Like, really? Like, I know the idea of death scares a lot of people, right? Obviously, but could you actually truly imagine not ever being able to die? Like, you just live forever. Like, does that actually sound like a good thing to you? The idea of you're always there. It will never end. It will continue to go forever and ever 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 and ever. Somehow, I don't know. The idea that life eventually will come to an end is somehow more comforting than the idea of it just going on endlessly, right? Till the end of time. I mean, worst case scenario, you'd live in a world where you live forever and everyone else died around you. You'd live through ages and see the people that you love and care about perish before you. But what if you lived in a world where everybody lived forever? Well then, assuming people kept reproducing, you'd be living in a world that eventually filled up so many people and that potentially would be abused so badly because there are no repercussions for, dangerous actions or whatever, that what would that lead to? Destruction of an entire world, a world filled with so many people, so much pollution that it would literally suffocate things, right? And then what? Yeah, the planet is destroyed. You're left into the empty vacuum of space. It's a funny idea, right? Just the idea that living forever seems like, fuck, man, that's fucking cool. But it's actually, I think, way more terrifying than truly having your life come to an end at some point. And I think that's why I always think it's a fascinating thing, this idea. And that's why I loved it so much, seeing the Gi come out and be just like these spirits that actually embrace and seek death, the end. And why I also loved the fact that Yuffie was the one to come out and be like, oh, that's fucking awesome. We're invincible, because she's young. She's a child. She's the youngest of the group, and she doesn't it's like something you don't really think about and you realize until you get older, right? You just realize what life and death really is and what a potential endless life would lead to. It's such a fucking cool, I genuinely love this edition of the Gi. This is such a massive improvement over what was essentially just weird ghost dudes that get kind of thrown to the side in the original game. So
for me, this illustrates why the developers may have expanded the Gi lore in such a way. Sure, it's incredibly cool in general, and it's something every player I've talked to has loved instinctively.
Hell yeah.
It made me ask the question, why? Why give the Gi this specific fate? Is it just because it's cool, or because it may have a bigger thematic role to play?
Oh, absolutely.
I believe the answer is the latter. It even gives greater context to why Aerith nearly derailed the race.
No, it's because it's fucking cool, nothing else. Nah, bitch, they're just the fucking undying spirits from the afterlife. That's fucking rad. This shit's so metal.
To the Sector 7 plate in Remake. Why was she so obsessed with helping these spirits, taking a moment in the middle of an emergency to free them and see them off? In a way, that was reminiscent of the River of Lights in Rebirth, because she had known of them since she was a kid, known that they were there with no way to help them. Until this moment, where she had the chance to set them free, to help them return to the Lifestream as it should be.
Again, all of this showing how much focus there really is, and what a section of the game that a lot of people don't love, because they're like, oh my god, the fucking train graveyard is now this section that was done in 10 minutes, and now it's freaking an hour and a half or something to get through. There's a fucking annoying boss fight and everything, but it's but it also expanded in this interesting way of her knowing these kids and seeing their spirits, and essentially her playing with them as a child, not even realizing they were already dead, right? That she was actually alone, and then having no way to be able to help them pass on, right? But that's also just the theme of this game in general, right? Is life and death, right? The idea of life and death and the cycle of life. So this is We're getting into this shit now, boys. Shit's just not put in here for no reason, right?
So long.
It also may give us a way to come to terms with the fate that Loveless Play reinforces as part of the core story, regardless of how much we hope to avoid it.
And yet, all tales that begin with a chance encounter share the same end. A tearful farewell.
While Aerith remaining in the Lifestream for eternity has been comforting to us as fans, we shouldn't be happy about the idea of Aerith living on forever. Living on forever is unnatural. It's not right. It's what Sephiroth wants, and we know how she feels about that. What we should want is a true conclusion to it all, the final purging of Sephiroth and Jenova so that we can truly save the planet and allow Aerith to return to it, as she's meant to and seems at peace with.
You know, if you think about it, life and death are just two sides of the same coin. Our bodies may disappear when we die, but our spirits still live on. We return to the planet, rejoin the Lifestream, and in time give rise to new life.
New life is ultimately what all of this is for. It's what the final shot of FF7 was always meant to direct our attention to. The state of the planet long after our main party is gone. The new life that could possibly be living on 500 years later. And while there has been debate about whether humanity survived or not, and perhaps even a bit of retconning over the years, the original intention of that scene was to convey that the planet and humanity lived on.
Right.
To quote the lead writer of the game, Kazushige Nojima, in an article from 2003, quote, "For the last scene of the ending, we decided not to harp on about what happened to each character like we've done in the past. Instead, we came up with the idea of suddenly skipping forward 500 years. Though people often say it's difficult to understand, the message is pretty straightforward. Basically, because of the efforts of Cloud and his allies, the planet is still around, and smoke is rising from Midgar, which means there are definitely still humans alive." If you're wondering what smoke he's talking about, it was accidentally omitted from the final animation.
So I'm like, there's smoke? Sorry, it was just so hard. It was such a low-res fucking FMV. And unfortunately, all these upscale versions of it make it look way worse.
Which gave the team a good laugh later on. But you actually can see it in the original theatrical cut of Advent Children, even though the smoke was curiously removed once again in Advent Children Complete, where the same updated CG animation appears, but without smoke once again.
Really?
That is essentially why Red 13 calls that fate a glimpse of tomorrow if we fail here today. A future without new life being born may be the ultimate fate that happens post-Advent Children, since ultimately neither Sephiroth nor Jenova were fully dealt with. And working toward an ending about creating the opportunity for new life beautifully fits the story. A story that starts with the Avalanche trying to stop the Mako reactors because they're literally sucking up souls as a finite resource, thus preventing life from springing anew. That's why Aerith and this story deserves an ending where we restore the Lifestream that Sephiroth and Shinra are destroying so callously that she's unable to return to the planet in peace, truly stopping them, truly ridding the world of Mako extraction and the corrupting influence of both Jenova and Sephiroth, or what's needed to truly save the world in the way they always intended to end the story. Yet, it would also mean that there would be no reason for Aerith to just live on in the Lifestream indefinitely. It would mean she would be free to move on as part of the renewed cycle of life and death. And as difficult as that ending would be, it would be a conclusion that reflects the quote I mentioned from Katase earlier. Though we won't know how the story ends until it's actually finished, I'm personally wishing that it will conclude without any unresolved feelings remaining. It would be a final true goodbye, just like another Final Fantasy these creators worked on. And it would lead to a new endpoint that exceeds the original game, an ending that wouldn't leave things in such a way that unresolved feelings would linger on and create unresolved problems like geostigma and another return of Sephiroth. And we should want that. An ending that leads directly into Advent Children would not only fail to pay off what was set up at the end of Remake, it would betray everything that's been built up in Rebirth. It would mean Zack, Aerith, and Sephiroth live on when they shouldn't. It would tether Aerith's fate to Sephiroth's, an eternal future of never dissolving into the Lifestream and an eternal, unending existence like the Geese. Fighting against that, to find acceptance with the cycle of life and death, a theme we've all said we've loved since 1997, means saying goodbye to not just the things we want gone, like Sephiroth, it means also saying goodbye to the things we wish to cling to, like Aerith. But just like Cloud, we will have to accept the reality, because the past, as Aerith put it, is forever. It can't be changed. Her death in the prime reality, the reality we fought so hard to create at the end of Remake, must persist. It must live on. And in this reality, her death has now happened. But the future, even if it's been written, can be changed. And that future may not be the one we know from the original, where Aerith lives on in the Lifestream, nor the one we want, with Aerith ending up alive and well. But it will be a future that won't be mired in grief and regret, as in the one we know that emerges in Advent Children, a future with the same dynamic that eventually wiped out the Cetra.
Though in time we triumphed over the calamity visited upon us by the stars, tragedy will nevertheless be our ultimate reward. Abandoned to unquenchable anger and unbearable grief, condemned and driven forth, powerless to forestall the coming of our end. Heed well our warning of that which is to come. The reunion, when our adversaries' scattered malignancy shall converge to plague the planet once more.
We must break the cycle, end Sephiroth and Jenova for good, and reach some third possibility, some synthesis that we can't see just yet. It will be what needs to happen as an outcome of this war of possibilities of final possible fates, which is how the developers have described it. It really seems like everything is building to a conclusion where we will be discovering which of these realities our characters choose. And though the stage is set, the game said it best already. None can divine the conclusion of every path, and no promises await at journey's end. But at this point, I'm certain what awaits is a different conclusion than one that leads directly into Advent Children. Because whether this is a sequel or not, it is something more than just a remake. That's because there is one unrealized dream that may matter more than all the rest, and it was expressed by the creative director of this entire project, Tetsuya Nomura, in the behind-the-scenes documentary for Advent Children.
完結した感がないというか、なんかまあこれで終わりじゃないぞという予感的なものでしょうか。なんかそれを言っちゃうとなんか単純に受け取られると、じゃあまた映像を作るのかっていうふうに取られるかもしれないですけど、そういう意味でのことじゃなくて、これがあったから多分できることがこれから増えそうな気がして。
We're gonna remake this bitch. In 800 years.
意味で完結したものということではなくて、何かここから先の大きなものの
Just give me a couple of decades
っていう作品になったかな。
Kill. Ah! Other funner possibilities, okay?
Ooh, that was a whole lot. But like I said, there are actually a couple of unknown journeys, and weirdly enough, the tagline Forever Crisis kind of fits that perfectly. Another possibility for remake. The first, more bittersweet journey that it laid out is one that I think could be beautiful, builds on the ideas they've been playing within this trilogy, and could make the thematic heart of Final Fantasy VII even more powerful and meaningful.
Yeah, I do think that idea that he set forth is, I like that a lot. I think that's pretty cool. But what else I got?
An idea that in order to move forward, we need to accept the truth of who we are and the things that happen to us, whether they be tragic or even unfair. And the potential power of that story, if told well, is a big reason why I now love this ending. Even if I'm wrong about the details of where they take the story and how it unfolds from here, I can see so much intentionality to the narrative choices they've made and see several different ways it can enhance the story and themes as we know them. Hell, Nomura said it himself in that quote I referenced about an hour ago. The key is not just to go along with players' opinions, but to think about the scenario clearly with intent.
Yeah.
It gives me not only reassurance about where things may go in the future, but also reassurance about the choices they've already made. I no longer feel as I did on day one, that perhaps it's just too messy, too undecided, or even potentially the wrong stopping point compared to, say, the Northern Crater scene. It also gives me greater appreciation of new moments that I've loved. And I swear I will talk about the possibility for remake that I teased, but I just gotta get this thought out. Even days after beating the game, a scene that really stuck with me was the goodbye scene in the church in Aerith's dream world.
Yeah.
This was the moment that made me cry. As I said at the start of the video, I never cried during Aerith's death in the original, in part because my uncle spoiled it before I got to it, so I knew it was coming. So to see Aerith use this moment with Cloud, this moment she never got in the original, not as a chance to change her fate, but rather to accept whatever happens as long as she could save Cloud from the grief we all witnessed for ourselves in Advent Children, that absolutely demolished me. It is such an act of selflessness and generosity, but yet still incredibly human, especially in this moment where she strengthens her embrace just a bit longer and the camera lingers on her eyes. I could feel how hard this was for her. And as a lifelong fan, I have seen how much the death of Aerith impacts Cloud. Since Advent Children came out 20 years ago, the image of him that has been left with me isn't one of triumph, but of tragedy. All he could think about is how he failed her and how he wants forgiveness.
I think I want to be forgiven. More than anything.
And what does Aerith do in this moment?
Cloud, thank you.
What would the Cloud of Advent Children think if he had gotten this embrace 2 years earlier? If he had gotten these words of reassurance? What would happen to him? How would he potentially change as a person? The thing Aerith feared could happen if they successfully changed fate, making this also serve as another hint that we may be headed for an all-new endgame.
But if we do, we'll be changing more than fate itself. If we succeed, if we win, we'll be changing ourselves. I guess, maybe, that's why I hesitated.
That's why there is so much meaning packed into this scene that did more for me emotionally than a perfect 100% faithful recreation of her death. I know people say that the confusing way they handled her death scene ripped the emotionality out of it, and I felt that way too, but this scene will live on with me more than the death scene ever could. Now that I got all that gushing out of the way, there is still one more thing to talk about. While I've thought a lot about Rebirth and feel like I have a lot more clarity on what they did and why, I also can't deny that there are still several loose ends I can't wrap my head around. And the biggest X factor relates back to the same developer quote I mentioned earlier. There are these things that we feel we can only do now in the remake project that can bring a new happiness, a new sort of feeling of satisfaction to players playing this game now, 27 years later. Now, while I am a big FF7 fan, and I have love for many Final Fantasy games, especially FF14 and the entire PS1 era including Tactics, I'm not as massive of a Square Enix fan or even Nomura fan as you might think. I haven't even played Kingdom Hearts. And so a big blind spot for me are some of the other titles made by these creators. And one thing I have heard from friends is that Kingdom Hearts 3 ends with, and I should give a very general spoiler warning here, a fairly feel-good ending even for characters who, as I understand, may not deserve it. And there was one in-game hint of a happy ending for this trilogy that I can't shake out of my head. I don't think this Cait Sith fortune has happened yet.
Things are looking up, so throw caution to the wind. Put your trust in others, and a last-minute twist may pleasantly surprise you.
Could the momentary saving of Aerith be what he's hinting at here? I'm not sure about that. While it's certainly a last-minute twist, it isn't really all that pleasant, since it's immediately ripped away from us and leads to an ending with Cloud in a really bad mental place, and the party not exactly on the greatest terms with him. That's why I believe the fortunes we received were given in reverse order. The last fortune, losing what Cloud cherishes most, was the first one we saw come to fruition. And the second fortune, watching our possessions for the lucky color black, came next. So if they are in reverse chronological order, then it means we have actually yet to see the first fortune. Quote, a last-minute twist that may pleasantly surprise you. As I said, I doubt many people would call the ending of Rebirth a pleasant surprise. And the ending I outlined about Aerith dissolving into the Lifestream also didn't quite feel like reaching a new happiness, like Atase said pretty recently. Not that I don't think there's something beautiful about it, but it's not really what I would call a happy ending, especially compared to some other happy endings from these creators. That's why that last-minute twist that may pleasantly surprise us may be what actually awaits us at the end of Part 3. In fact, one way such an ending could potentially shake out is something I plan to explore in another video, and it's about how the idea of acceptance may actually extend to how we rid the world of Sephiroth in a way that prevents him from returning in Advent Children. But this video is definitely over an hour and a half at this point, so I'll save that for a deep dive video about Sephiroth. Either way, both of these unknown journeys are really born from just investigating questions I have and seeing where they lead me, given what's been shown and explored in these games, as well as principles I've learned about storytelling. That's my approach. I wondered why Remake showed Zack early in a way that potentially spoiled the biggest twist in FF7, and it led me to the idea of the devs creating an unreliable world. Likewise, everyone assumed Zack's survival would lead him to showing up at the Forgotten Capital to help save Aerith, but I wondered what would even lead him there in the first place. That question led me to speculate that he would never leave Midgar. I figured he would follow her last known location after being captured by Sung. I was wrong about the details. He didn't go looking for Aerith in the Shinra building after talking to Elmira and ends up face to face with Deep Grounds, which I thought was being set up in the DLC, but he did stay in Midgar. And so that's what led me to the ideas in this video. The questions about why they ended the story where they did and how they did, and questioning how that might reflect the story they're telling and what it's really about. I could be wrong, I almost certainly am on some things, but man, does it feel good to be making these videos again. And with that, I'm so grateful to you if you made it all the way through to the end of this video. Of course, I'd really appreciate it if you could like, subscribe, and share this video around. I hate to do the YouTuber thing, but also hit the bell button, because it really is the best way to know that I have a new upload, since I upload pretty infrequently. And I hope to hear your takes in the comments. I usually do read them and respond almost too much.
What a fucking trip,
I would feel like an absolute jackass if I didn't throw some shout outs to really good friends in the community that have helped me make sense of everything in either direct or indirect ways, including the guys at Shinra Archaeology Department, Turquoise Hammer, Gene and Odie, Schrodinger's Baby Seal, Sleep Easy, Night Sky Prince, Lowly Joe, Eyes on V, Blitz, Prof Noctis, and there may be a couple others I'm forgetting, but go follow all of them if you aren't already, please. Anyway, thank you, and I have at least a few more Rebirth videos bouncing around in my head that I will hopefully drop soon. But in the meantime,
see ya!
See ya! Fucking hell, man. That was great. Holy shit. Holy shit. God damn, man. Wow. That was pretty great. That was pretty damn great. Very insightful. I will say, in regards to his comments on the ending there, as someone has, you know, experienced Kingdom Hearts and everything. Yeah, I mean, his comments and the idea that would be like, because a lot of ways, like Ansem and Xehanort and everybody, they're all sort of kind of forgiven in a way, right? When they did a lot of pretty terrible shit. But here's the thing, you know, Nomura is not the only creative mind behind FF7, you know? And funny enough, it seems to me like Nomura in a lot of ways is like he's prevented shit from happening. Like, was it Hamaguchi or Katase, whoever it was that like originally like the ending of the series or no, what was gonna happen was that like everybody died in Northern Crater except for like Tifa and Cloud or something, like some shit, like or like it was some wild and shit that Nomura had to talk them out of and be like, whoa, hey, hold up there, you know? Like Nomura's, yeah, he goes off the deep end, but I would interpret that line if maybe like, yes, a pleasant twist may surprise you, right? I think it just comes back to the idea that, yes, they want an ending where there can be happiness, but I think the idea too that like, I mean, Sephiroth being erased, but Aerith dying and for good, it's like, it's sad, but it's also what she wants. That's kind of her happiness in my opinion. So that's still, that bittersweet nature of it could still be there without it necessarily giving it up for, because she is gone forever, you know? Maybe as the player. I mean, I think that the idea of in a lot of ways of this game is that it allows people and allows players to sort of realize that there's beauty in death, right? That death isn't always the end and that it is also a way to like for us to rest, right? And life to continue. So even though maybe we don't want to accept Aerith's death, you know, right? Like Cloud, we don't to accept that she's gone. It's better to accept it and for her to actually be allowed to move on, you know, not be held down to this plane and having to fight Sephiroth for like all eternity. Yeah, I really like that proposal for that ending, you know, that idea. I think that a scenario where essentially we're drawing upon multiple instances. It's not just what was set up in the original game for Cloud's like awakening, of realizing who he is. But I think the idea, and it was something that Max proposed and brought up to me that I really like, is that idea that we are the culmination of our experiences, not just from this game, but from potentially from everything else in FF7 that has come before it, right? Because we have characters and things happening and existing outside of this flow that exists. So the idea that he realizes that this is not just who he really is that he learned about in the story, but who he is and who he was in Having Children, and how the original story ended, and how maybe he doesn't have to be that person, you know? He can be better than that. And maybe get to a point where he can exist beyond the Lifestream as well, to where he can maybe face off and truly end Sephiroth, right? I think something that wasn't touched on either specifically in this video that we also don't have answers for is why Sephiroth feels that he needs Cloud. I think that's something that was really driven home hard in Rebirth that wasn't really answered in this video, is why does Sephiroth feel he needs Cloud? Like, why can't he do this himself? Why can't he pick any other one of the billion other hooded dudes that are seemingly doing his bidding, right? I think my personal theory of that is that Cloud is the only one out of all of those other people that has enough of a connection to Sephiroth to do what he wants, while the hooded men aren't actually doing what Sephiroth wants, but what Jenova wants. So my thought behind that is just simply that Cloud and his history with Sephiroth and potentially the experiments done to him connect him not just to Jenova, but maybe more strongly with Sephiroth. Hell, all the instances where Sephiroth is talking and like influencing Cloud, right, throughout Remake and Rebirth, it's like, is that Jenova or is that Sephiroth? Maybe Sephiroth in his own way. Because, hey, let's be honest, that wasn't there in the original game, right? Maybe that's to suggest this is not just simply Jenova fucking with Cloud. that it's actually Sephiroth trying to get a firmer grip on Cloud himself so that he's the one in control and not Jenova. I don't know. That's just a thought, but maybe that's why he would need Cloud specifically. It's a really interesting discussion, you know? It really is a fun topic of understanding and thinking about where they could go with the theming of these games. And holy shit, man. What a cool ass idea though. I love the idea proposed in this video, right? I do hope that Sephiroth's desires do extend beyond himself. That's my one thing. I really don't want it to just simply be he wants to refuse to die and that's it. Because death sucks and fuck that shit, you know? Like, I don't want to be just a memory. I like that. I think that's good, but I think my hope, and that's what I think we're getting from Ever Crisis, is that will be something that isn't just about him living forever, but he sees it himself as helping everyone else live forever too. And I think that might be exactly what loops back around, right, to what he will tantalize Cloud with. And I think that's a truly fucking awesome way to end this series, is the idea that I can bring Aerith back for you, or I can make the world that you created through your desires, I can make that a reality. That will be the world that I make true. Fuck. That's really fucking cool. But anyway, a huge fucking shout out to Subtext for just insane video, dude. Just like it beautifully edited as well. Just beautifully edited. It was a joy to sit through that. God damn, no wonder Max said that was like the FF7 fucking like lore video, like the Rebirth lore video, because that really kind of encompassed a lot of what other people and a lot of myself have talked about. But man, oh man, some of those ones in the end of how it all just kind of connects in a way that could really lead to a satisfying ending that maybe is what the developers themselves are aiming for. Fuck, that's fucking cool. Shit, have I been doing this for potentially like near 3 hours? Good God almighty. I was like, this is a 2-hour video. I'm gonna probably talk about stuff in between. It's gonna lead to something really long. Well, I think I'll shut the fuck up now. And again, if you haven't already, please do consider clicking the link down below, going to the original video, leaving a like, a comment, subscribing to Subtext for just like the insane work that he put into this. All right, because come on, man, that was a lot. It was a lot. All right, he literally made like a motion picture here. All right. Full length motion picture. And hey, if you enjoyed hearing my thoughts on this, consider liking my video as well. And if you haven't already, why not subscribe? Become a Vicky Penguin aboard the SSLP, where the days are always sunny and the vids are always funny. And I fucking love FF7 and talking about the remake series. Fuck me. I cannot wait to see part 3. I cannot wait, dude. Goddamn. Part 3 is setting up to potentially actually be the best game in the series. Just for the fact, even gameplay stuff aside, just the fact that we would actually seemingly get an ending to all of these plot points they've set up now for 2 games is like, oh, goddamn, man. And if they could stick this landing, they really can just hit it in a way that just like punches you so square in the gut with like emotions and feelings and stuff that we've literally been waiting like 20 some plus fucking years for this shit to happen. No, actually, literally by the time this game comes out, it'll be like 30 years, right? 30-year cook. And we get to this moment where like peak fiction happens and it all just comes together. Man. Oh, what a great time it will be to be an FF7 fan. That's my hope, at least. Fingers crossed. Anyway, thank you guys so much for joining me. If you sat through this entire video with me, I truly appreciate it. And hope you all will stick around when I inevitably check out part 3, whenever the hell that comes out, in probably 2 to 3 years. So thank you guys so much for joining me. And as always, till next time, guys, stay classy.